You're listening to the Joel Martin Mastery Podcast, home of the 2-hour deep dive interview with gold, platinum, and multi-platinum bands, including Stained, Blue Rodeo, The Arkells, Finger 11, Big Wreck, Moist, Beddoe Soundclash, I Mother Earth, Ill Scarlet, Neverending White Lights, Thornley, and many more. Please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast as well as share, comment, and like. Now let's dive in to today's episode. Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of the podcast. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. We are joined by a very special guest. He's achieved a level of mastery as a drummer, having played on 4 of the most iconic albums from the multi-platinum and Juno Award-winning band Finger 11, as well as on the debut album for the supergroup Saint Asonia. So welcome to the podcast, making his triumphant return, Rich Beddoe. Rich, how are you, and how has the first week of 2023 been treating you so far?
Oh man, hello. How are you? Very good. Very good. It's been, chilling at home with my son as he's right here. Already 10 seconds into the interview, interrupting us. But yeah, that's what it's been all about.
If I was that cute, I would make sure that I was on camera at all times as well. So I get it.
Go get some water, buddies. Oh, and here we go. Yeah. So yeah, got some water, dude. Yes. So 2023, good so far. Yeah, man, home with family and grateful and all that good stuff.
That's awesome. So you were on the podcast about 6 months ago. So this was back on episode 59. We did the full deep dive interview. We went through your entire life and career, your entire discography. It was the longest interview of all time in the podcast history. We went 3.5 hours. There was still lots to talk about after that. So we'll dive into a few extra questions here to kick this off. But you are actually here to kick off a brand new series on the podcast. So this is called My 5 Favorite Albums, and it's featuring popular musicians, and we're going to dive into their 5 favorite albums. So 2 music nerds geeking out over some great albums, and it's going to be awesome. So I actually wanted to start by thanking you because our interview that we did, so it's one of the 10 most popular interviews of all time in the podcast history. I personally think it's the best episode of the podcast ever. So I hold that interview in high regards because of how deep we went and how vulnerable you were and authentic, and you were spitting the truth. And I know that a lot of people love that episode. So I want to thank you, number one, for an all-time great episode, in my humble opinion, whatever that's worth. And I also want to thank you because you've actually helped out the podcast quite a bit. It was because of you that we were able to get the Big Wreck drummer, Sekou, on the podcast, which is a top 10 most popular episode of all time. And you were also able to get Dave Buckner from Papa Roach, which was a super popular episode. So that was you helping me out, helping out the podcast, allowing me into your amazing network of great musicians. So thank you for those as well.
Oh man, I'm so glad. When we did that interview, ever since that, a few people I've talked to, Dave being one of them, and Sekou, both guys that I talk to pretty often. It's kind of rare to do especially for me these days. Nobody gives a crap of what I'm doing these days, but to do such a long, deep dive interview. Yeah, those guys I knew would be good, and man, I listened to them and they were really great. You did as well with those as I knew you would, as deep as we got. So I'm glad, man. I'm really happy that I was able to do that for you. And yeah, cool. Love
Amazing. So we have there's so much to talk about with your 5 favorite albums, because all 5 of them are all-time great albums. It's an eclectic mix. We're going through metal and prog rock and pop and hip hop. But before we start that, despite doing 3.5 hours last time, I still have some more questions that are related to your career, your drumming. Is it okay if I ask you just a few questions before we go into those 5 albums?
Please, yes.
Okay, awesome. So a few questions I didn't get to ask you during the other episode is, what do you think, when you look back at your entire career, all the albums you've made, all the music you've recorded, what do you personally think at the end of the day are your 5 best recorded drum performances? Maybe you had some wild live performances that are something else, but on tape, what did we get on tape that is at the top of the game for you, do you think?
Okay, well, first of all, I'd be lying if I didn't say I'm looking down at, knowing you were going to ask me that. I must be forefront and say I'm looking at that shit, because I had to like listen back to some of that stuff and think, because it's like what's the hardest performance? What's the best performance? What's the most memorable performance? So I don't know. I came up with a couple here. Well, I came up with 5 that just so I can answer you. But so here they are. So Good Time, the song Good Times on the self-titled record. I know you talked to Steve, who's playing drums with Finger 11 these days. And he mentioned that too, but that's one of them. And it's not even like, none of these songs are really difficult to play. I think it's just what was going on while I recorded them, how the song kind of came together to be what it is. And I think Good Times is that the song was written for the Daredevil soundtrack, which I have right here in front of me, the big stupid gold record.
So wait, so before it was even going to be on a Finger 11 album, or that album specific, it was written outside of that for Daredevil?
Yeah. Originally we got given this little like VHS 25-second tape of Ben Affleck up in a roof raptor, like on top of a fan, about to fight some guys in a bar, and they were asking if we could write something for that scene. So that was originally written for that, and we didn't know what to write. We just saw like a fight sequence. So that little drum dig 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 dig, that thing just kind of came from watching, this unedited version of Ben fighting in the scene. And again, it's not like the hardest drum performance at all, which none of mine are. I'm not one of those kind of drummers where there's something extremely difficult to play, but I think it was just the energy of it. And it was one of those songs that I think it was always just doing it live, like recreating it live was sometimes more of a challenge. So yeah, it sort of builds, and it's like the end of that song just keeps going and going. And as a drummer, it starts from like just a bass drum floor tom thing to like then adding 8th note hi-hats to like it just keeps building up and up until the very end of the song. And yeah, I don't know, it's not incredibly difficult, but it's just fun. And it was always fun trying to pull it off like the record live. So I guess that would be number 1 for me.
Yeah, I think that the drums on that song are one of the main hooks. I think if you stripped your actual drum playing and you had more of just like a steady beat, it wouldn't be the same. I feel like the drums are a part of what makes that song great. What brings people back to it, the hook that stays with you. It's kind of that driving energy of like the tom work. That's what I think. And when talking to Steve, who he's recreating what you originally created, like that's your unique drum playing and your creativity. He mentioned that song for the hardest drums to play for Finger 11, as well as what he most looks forward to. Like when he sees that song in the set, it's like, okay, there's a fun one. So
cool.
That's pretty sweet. What else do we have on this list here?
So there's a song, the last song of from the same record, that self-titled record, is called Obvious Heart. That song to me, drum wise, is one of my favorites. I think it really encompasses what me and Sean, the bass player of the band, how we used to lock in together. It just has a cool like flow to the song from beginning, middle to end. By the end of the song, it really evolves into this whole other thing. Almost sounds like it's going into another song as it's like voluming out at the end of it. but whenever I think about my drum performance, especially with Finger 11, I always think about like me and Sean's playing together, and there's a bunch of them, but it's always like where we locked in the most, or where we just, if the song called for it, if we were able to kind of lock in that way. And Obvious Heart was one of those. It's really I don't know, it's kind of like a dream sequence song to me. It has one of those vibes. It could almost be an instrumental song, but and it might have been in the beginning before Scott, had put some stuff to it. But yeah, it's just it's like a little journey, that song. So that one to me is up there for sure. And it's really because of me and Sean's, how we played together.
Yeah, Sean is so good as a bass player.
Yes,
he's
sure.
so good, man. Like every time I listen to Finger 11, I always have the good studio headphones, so it's like I can hear every instrument in its own place and that clarity. And the bass is just always perfect. It's like you wouldn't want the bass to be doing anything else than what it's doing, because he nailed it. Whether it's the right groove, whether it's an extra hook that keeps your attention, whether it's locking in with the drums. I can't say enough. And you've mentioned 2 songs off of the self-titled album. I always thought, so I have Grace of Blue Skies up here in your honor. This is the wall of fame here of favorite albums from favorite guests on the podcast. So I always thought that this was my favorite Finger 11 album. And the more I dove into the 4 albums that you've played on, I actually think maybe the self-titled album is the strongest start to finish. Do you agree with that at all, or am I completely out of whack?
No, I do agree. I said this the last time we spoke, which I hate saying, but I just got to say it. Unfortunately for me, the playing and the songs on that record are really stand out to me. It's just the mix of that record.
You said it fell flat or something?
I just think it sounds like a demo tape. Still to this day, I listen back, and when I knew I was going to speak to you again, I went back and listened to some stuff, and still, man, it's like, I just think that album sounds like absolute shit. And I mean,
do you think it needs like a remaster someday, where it's like
a remix and a remaster? Yeah. I'm not sure how the other guys feel about it, but when I listen back with all the other records, it sounds like a demo tape to me. I don't know what was, skipped over there along the way, but I think we were going for an in the room live performance thing. In particular, the sounds of the drums on that record, I cannot stand, and just the mix, and it just doesn't sound great to me looking back. Songs like One Thing, I think even a demo version of that song would have always, the song stands out no matter what. That song need a bunch of big production, but some of the other big rock songs on there, I think just could have used that little extra oomph to them. And I don't know. I'm not sure what we were thinking at the time. I'm not sure what the guys would think now, but I can't stand putting that record on how it sounds. So hopefully one day others will agree with me and get it remixed. But
I remember from our last interview, if I'm recalling correctly, you were saying that the song Living in a Dream is the pinnacle of what you thought sounded the best as far as like mixing and mastering. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and that's the next record after that. Or sorry, that's 2 records after that. So the album that we're talking about right now is the self-titled record.
Right.
Yeah, Living in a Dream on Life Turns Electric. That album, we mixed that song and finished that song first. Man, I can't believe I can't remember the name of the guy that mixed the song.
Is it like one of the big, like Andy Wallace or like Chris Lord-Alge or Tom Lord-Alge or whoever?
It is. I wonder. Yeah, I should know that, but yeah, that, like, opposite of what I'm saying now, is the best sounding song I think we ever had as far as the mix goes. Living in a Dream. And actually that takes me to my next song on the list. I've always been a fan of like a shuffle, which, as a drummer, the term a shuffle can there's a lot, it comes from a lot of different things, but like Steve Porcaro from the band Toto sort of came up with this, we all sort of know it as the Rosanna shuffle, which is like and that's drum talk. everyone else will say, what the hell did that sound like? But
you're educating the non-drummers that are listening, which is good.
Whenever drummers talk, we always go, tss, 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 tss. But there's a shuffle in that song that I always wanted to try to get on one of our songs. But to do a shuffle there has to be a particular tempo, a particular vibe to the song where that would fit. And Living in a Dream has a 4 on the floor, which means it's, the bass drum is landing where the snare drum lands too. So it's like, it's always going with the snare. And the shuffle is that. So, and that's Living in a Dream. And I think a few years before I sort of became aware of, I became a huge Toto fan, a Jeff Porcaro fan. And it's just really hard I think, to get that sort of groove into a rock song, or at least, within our band it was. So when we were writing that, it just came up 4 on the floor, hi-hat shuffle, and just the way it was mixed and recorded, to me, it just stands out as one of our best sounding songs. And then I think one of my most simplest, but like best drum performances. So yeah, Living in a Dream for sure. Still to this day is like, if you play it loud, it's like probably the best sounding Finger 11 recorded song I think we got.
I went back after the interview, after you said that, and I listened to it, and yeah, it's a great full mix, and that one blasts right out of the speakers when you crank it, which is awesome. So that's we've gone through, I believe, 3 of the best drum performances. We got 2 more. There's a bonus one. We got 6. How many do we got here?
Okay, well, I also, looking at my list, when I made the Saint Asonia record, Let Me Live My Life is a song that is one of my favorite drum performances. It's probably the best like rock performance I've ever done. It's not a tricky thing, but it's one of those things that if it's played correct, it can be played wrong, and you can kind of hear that it's done wrong. If it's done right, like I've watched other people play the song, you can kind of tell when it's not quite locked in where it's supposed to be. The floor tom thing on the chorus and the intro, because I'm a left-handed drummer, but I don't know if you can see here, my hi-hat hand is over here on my left. Usually drummers have their floor toms over here. I also have those, but I also have the floor tom over here beside my hi-hat. So it kind of allows me to do some different kind of stuff than you normally would switching over. So it Let Me Live My Life, it's like, but I'm able to get to that tom easier. So, and then during the verse, there's like a triplets that happen on the bass drum that usually I would never do something like that in Finger 11. It's done with one pedal, but it's almost like I'm so bad at talking about drum stuff. As I'm talking here, I'm like, how do I make this sound cohesive?
I'm following you, but I'm a musician, so.
Yeah, it's just one of those drum parts. It's like a real rock song, a real rock performance. There's just a couple triplets on the bass drum that are done with a single pedal that even live, I used to use a double pedal for just to sort of cheat it a bit. And the chorus just has this driving floor tom, bit on every quarter note. There's this floor tom hitting, and when Adam wrote the melody to it, the drum part sort of works perfectly with the guitar part and the melody. And to me, it's one of those like iconic, drum recordings that, like I said, I hear other people play and I see it on YouTube, people playing, and it's one of those things. I don't know if it's because I'm a left-handed guy and I have that floor tom over here, just sort of added that unusual element to it. But
that floor tom on the side is like your cheat code as a drummer.
It is. Yeah. I think it's funny. A lot of guys do that these days, a lot of drummers, but I always did it just because it was just hard to get over here sometimes. It was just easier to be here to get here than over here. So I could kind of do more stuff. I ended up having 3 floor toms. With Finger 11, I think for a while I just had 1 and 1. And in Saint Asonia I had 2 and the third one over here. But yeah, so that one just is like a really great drum rock performance that I think stands up, in my opinion. So that's up there for me.
Yeah, I like you describing this, because not only are we getting the behind the scenes of these songs, and you're describing what you're playing, so we're hearing like the intricate parts of the drums, but also where you said like, hey, I don't know if I'm like explaining this right, we're also getting to see kind of the way that you think as well. As you explain it, we get to see kind of the machinery turning as you think about it, and we get inside the mind as well, which is awesome.
It's funny because as I'm like reliving the song in my head, talking about it, I'm like, you kind of forget sometimes what went into the song, because you can just listen back to the song and kind of play along, but when you kind of dig into it a little more, I start remembering more what was involved, and it's kind of fun, man. Like before we did this interview, I was listening back to some of these songs, and it's like, it's just interesting. You remember sort of those conversations you had with the producer at the time, or with the bandmates at the time. And especially with saying Asonia, I went in there really with nothing. Mike Mushak and Adam had some demos laid out, but there were no drum parts at all. And usually in most bands, like you demo stuff, the way that band was put together, we never went through that little phase. It was like me and Adam, leaving our bands and wanting to start something else. Mike having Stained kind of broken up so Aaron could go to his country stuff. It was all sort of thrown into this little demo thing. And until we got into the studio, start making a record, that's when it was like, okay, here we are now. What's happening? We didn't have months and months of going through these songs, trying out different parts like you usually would in most bands. It was like I was in the studio on the drums with Johnny, the producer, and Mike and Adam, and we were creating these things for the record. And those are the parts. So it was a lot of like talking through the parts, talking through the songs. Mike Mushak really, trying to communicate with me where he was going with that stuff, because all of his riffs were kind of done. A few of the songs were actually already done for Stained records. I know there's one or two songs that were like going to be on the Stained record before and just didn't make it. So we were interpreting those songs, all over again. And I'm trying to think what the song, I think Blow Me Wide Open was a Stained song. And there was a whole other recording of it that I didn't hear till after the fact. So, it was cool, man. Like with Finger 11, it was so different, where we went in, we demoed stuff for months and months, worked out parts. Me and Sean, working at intricacies of as far as the rhythm section stuff, listening to Scott's melodies, and he's right here beside me. Of course.
That's okay. We get a little sneak peek into the home life.
And but yeah, with Saint Asonia, it was more getting to the studio and just through back and forth communication, just trying to get those drum parts done. And Let Me Live My Life was one of those where it was a banger off the top. But back to that floor tom thing I was saying, it sort of made it for me unique, and it stands out to me like one of my favorite recorded songs.
It's when I was 16, Mike, the guitarist from Stained, was like my first guitar idol. So it's so wild to me that you were in a band with him. That was your life, and to me, it's like that's one of my heroes up there. So it's so cool to see like the inside scoop as someone that was in there in the trenches with him. So
hey man, he's a hero to me too. He's awesome guy, amazing songwriter, and he's a legend for sure.
And Stained just announced they're working on a new album. So they haven't put out an album since I think 2010, 2011. So as a Stained fan, there's actually new music coming. They've been playing live, but no new music since John Wysocki left the band way back in the day. So that's exciting as a Stained fan. When you say the producer Johnny, I'm assuming, is that Johnny K?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So there's a history there with Finger 11 as well, right? Not just Saint Asonia?
He did 2 Finger 11 records.
Okay.
Now with him again with Same Asonia. So yeah, I did. And then we actually demoed a bunch of stuff with him for Finger 11. So there was like 4 actual long time hangs there. But each record were about, I think 3 or 4 months I was there. So I spent a lot of time in Chicago with Johnny, and of course the first self-titled Finger 11 record, and then Them Versus You Versus Me, and then the Saint Asonia record. But yeah, somewhere along the way there, we considered him doing, I guess, what would have been Life Turns Electric Finger 11 record. We demoed a bunch of stuff with him there as well. But and a few of those songs made that record. Listening back to that, when we were going to do this interview, I was kind of listening back to all these songs. I forgot a few of those ones. You know, we'd gone through with Johnny and worked on some stuff. So a long history with Johnny K, and he's still a really good friend of mine. He lives, you know, pretty close to me now. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. So what do we got left for all-time best drum performances? You got 1 or 2 left?
Let's see here. I got my little list. So so from Saint Asonia record, Fairy Tale, that song is one of my favorite drum performances. And the reason for that in particular, the end of that song, again, try to figure out not to do drum talk. The end of that song, kind of at the very last 25 seconds of the song, kind of morphs into from the chorus groove to the outro groove. There's a little ending tie-in thing there that Johnny came up with, actually, that it was so hard for me to relearn to play after the fact. So if you're listening to Fairy Tale, listen to the last 20 seconds of the song, and there's just a bass drum pattern in there that kind of reverses around, and to me it's complex, and it's one of those things nobody ever would really notice, as they shouldn't. You know, I think a drum part, especially in a rock band, like, you don't want it to get in the way and notice. You know, if you're a drummer or if you're talking about it like this, it's kind of cool to highlight it, but you know, you don't want something to be so over the top that it's in the way. I'm trying to get these kids out of the picture here, but
that's all good. They're enjoying a lazy Sunday. I mean, life is good.
Yeah. So this is what's going on beside me.
There you go.
Yeah,
you got the whole squad. You got hashtag family goals going on right now.
Yeah. But yeah, so Fairy Tale is one of those songs that it's the first song that Adam showed me that he'd worked on with Mike. And yeah, I don't even remember a demo before that. I think that was the first thing Adam ever showed me, that before it was going to be Saint Asonia or anything. He's like, I'd gotten together with Mike Mushak, and here's the first song we came up with. I remember sitting in Adam's living room and listening through to that. And I think it was just a drum machine at the time. But that was also the first song I sat and worked on with Johnny and Mike in the studio. So the last song on my list would be My Carousel on the Finger 11 record, Grace the Blue Skies. That song for me is, and we'll get into it later talking about some of my favorite records, especially Queensryche. I've always been really interested in just the bass drum and the bass player's relationship. I've always loved bands that really were, when the bass drum hits, the bass player's hitting the same note. And My Carousel, I think, was the first song I did with Finger 11 where me and Sean were really locked in, like, precisely on that. From the verse, which is this weird sort of, offbeat thing, to the chorus, which is very, every single boom, 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 boom. Every time I hit the bass drum, Sean is hitting that note as well. And it was just I think that was our first, me and Sean's first relationship as drummer bass player, where we, I think, a sign of things to come, where I know, like, on the record before me on Tip, I don't think there was that kind of playing necessarily with our last drummer. When I joined the band, that was really always what I was trying to get out of, a relationship with the bass player. So I think that was one of the first songs we worked on that record where it was locked in like that. And, I remember I listened to that podcast you did with Steve, describing that record. He was, I think he had thought that record was all programmed. And it wasn't all programmed. I just played that record on V drums. So I was still playing those parts. They were just going into I was playing on electronic drums, but they weren't programmed. So I remember when I heard that, I did want to correct that and say it's a little different than that. So me and Sean were in the same room playing that and every other song. The signal that was going into the computer was a digital signal. So
yeah, it gave that album a unique sound, right? It had a specific sound to it, which
sure.
Still sounds great today. It was like ahead of its time.
It still does hold up today. And maybe that's because all of the drum performances these days are all programmed on all these rock albums that, it still stands up. I'm sorry, Steve. One more second. Hold on. This is part of the interview is when you have kids, you have to give them tuna and yeah.
Well, that's all good.
Podcast and
I want to keep this part in. That was awesome. He's handing you a little something.
Here's your cookies. Come here. Come here.
Oh man, they're living the dream. Just cookies,
I know. Where are they? Here. Come here. Look.
I could go for some cookies right now too.
Yeah, this is so when you're doing a podcast with a dad, these things will kill some time.
Oh, you fancy. Your kids get the good stuff.
Here.
I'd be getting those like no-name cookies, the discount brands.
There you go. Yeah, I'd hope that he would be in the other room the whole time, but when you have kids, podcasts or not, you got to roll the punches.
Yeah, you got your priorities straight, which is making sure the kids are alive and well and healthy. And
maybe
happy.
It doesn't make for the best interview, but I'm sure the listeners will relate.
Again, we're going for authentic more than anything else, and we're definitely being fully transparent and authentic right now. And I actually have our first fan question sent in. So we have a fan question from Michelle Sam Benedetto from the Finger 11 fan crew group on Facebook. And Michelle asks, what does Finger 11 mean to you? It's a very open question. How do you answer?
Oh, wow. Well, I guess it's so funny. Well, thank you, Michelle, for asking that. For so many years, that question was asked, and I had this very specific answer that I gave, which was always, Finger 11 is like a third eye or a sixth sense or something like that. But I guess now in hindsight, when somebody's asking me that, what it means to me now, it's the proudest part of my musical history. The proudest part of my life right now is my family and my child. But I think when you're in the middle of it all, meaning being in Finger 11 for whatever it was, 20 years, it just seems so different now than it was then, where there's just a real, just such a history and a part of my soul that's attached to that part of my life that Finger 11 to me isn't just a word, or just isn't a band name, or just not a band that I was in. It's really part of my fiber now, part of my DNA. And it's great that, those songs always carry on. I actually just got in the mail today, before we did this interview, this paralyzer thing that we talked, that I saw Steve also got in the mail as well. So it's fun. It just kind of keeps coming up every few months. There's another reminder of the impact of the band. And what's really cool is in the last, year or so, me and the guys have been more in touch again after, a lot of years of absence of talking and stuff. And we've got kind of something really cool planned for this year that we're going to put together, the five of us. So, yeah, it really means a lot to me. It's my whole journey in life, man. Everything, all of my dreams came true within, under the umbrella of Finger 11. Everything that meant anything to me was with that band. So, and now I have a baby screaming in the background. That also means as much. But yeah, it means the world to me. And I think it was Michelle that asked. I mean, there's going to be something really cool coming this year that the five of us are going to put together again that I think the fans have been waiting to see that we're going to do. So it'll be cool. Look out for that.
I have to take a moment to congratulate you on the record-breaking success of Paralyzer. It's the song that just keeps on going. So it's the only rock song in Canadian music history to go 5 times platinum. So that is a song that you are a part of the writing, the creation of. Your drum parts are super unique and are one of the things that make that such a catchy song, such a memorable song. And yeah, I mean, nobody else in human history can say has that accolade in Canada. So congratulations, man. You got a plaque. You got the achievement. That's pretty awesome, man. How does that feel?
You know, thank you, man. It's one of those things when you read it on paper, all that stuff, it's kind of mind blowing how a song has done that well. But I just always think back to the moment that song was written. You know, I mean, it was written in such a under a 5-minute period of time. You can just never guess how well a song is going to do or not going to do. I mean, there's a bunch of songs that we wrote that I was so sure that was going to go on to do so well that never, you know, saw the light of day. But it's amazing. You have these things on your wall that say you've sold this many records or it's done this and that. And it's a little mind blowing, but it really is just something on your wall. You know, I think what really matters is the memories of creating that song or the memories of, you know, going out and playing that song and seeing the impact that song had on other people. That kind of sticks with you. I'd be lying to say it isn't an ego thing to see that, you know, this thing up on your wall, but it just, you know, it's just that, you know, it's just a plaque on your wall. What really sticks with me is just the 5 guys that were there creating that in the moment. You know, I think we're really lucky to have that. And I mean, it still blows my mind that song has done what it has. But yeah, it's a bond that I'll forever have with those guys and, you know, the fans of that band. And yeah.
That's awesome, man. I think the last time I checked, that song has like 200 million plays on Spotify or something ridiculous as well. 200 million. Yeah. It's wild, man. It's hard to put into context the numbers and the success, but I had a question for you. So I've heard a rumor that you were asked by Sean Morgan of Seether to become a member of the band. Is this true or is this fake news? Rich, you got to tell me.
That is true. Yeah. Back, when was that? We were touring Canada actually with Our Lady Peace. When was that? I think we did a tour with the Trailer Park Boys, Our Lady Peace, Seether, and ourselves. And I always, and still to this day, really great friends with those guys. And I don't know. It's kind of interesting that the way things came to be with my place in the band or are not in the band anymore. I don't know what signals were read there back then, but you know, me and Sean always really good friends. And yeah, at one point he asked if, you know, if I'd considered jumping over. And at that time, you know, that wasn't really an option for me, as things were, you know, things were what they were. But yeah, we have a long history of friendship and hanging out with me and Sean. And I think as far as I know, he told me a long time ago, I'm the only guy that's, I think, ever said no to him on any business decision. I'm the only guy that turned him down. But yeah, I'm friends with all of Seether's drummers, John Humphrey, their guy that they have now for many years. And he's one of my best buddies. So, I mean, the best choice ever for them. But yeah, that did happen at one point. Yeah, it wasn't meant to be.
I saw a quadruple bill once that had Bush, Seether, 3 Days Grace, and Nickelback. So this is in Ottawa So I did see Seether, and I was a big Seether fan at the peak with Fake It. What is it? Dark melodies. There's like a long negative. I don't know, something dark, something negative. There's a what is it? Finding beauty in negative spaces or something. Anyways, they man, they had a ton of success, platinum, and that one album was so good where they had Fake It, and there was like 4 hit singles, and it's like that one album, everything fell into place. It's one of the great, like, you know, whatever you would call that genre of, I don't know if they lumped them in with new metal or whatever, but the rock genre. They had one album that was my jam that I remember going to HMV and buying and playing the crap out of that one. So
I love the guys in Seether. They're some of my best pals. What an amazing career they've had. Sean writes such incredible songs. Me and him have had all kinds of ups and downs over the years in our friendship. And actually Corey, that played bass in Saint Asonia, is now the guitar player of Seether. So our paths align in so many ways, but I absolutely love, Dale, John, and Sean, and Corey, of course, from that band. And yeah, we've known each other for over 20 years, and it's been amazing. I mean, like I said, Sean writes such great fucking songs, such great radio hooks, and yeah, he's an awesome dude. And they're just an awesome band, man. So yeah, maybe I should have been in that band. I'm not sure, but I guess this wasn't meant to be at that time. But yeah, I was invited to join the group at one point.
That's awesome. So there's 2 more fact checks that we have to do. One of them is the band USS. They had a top 15 hit in Canada on the alternative charts called Shipwrecks. I've heard that even though you're not in the band, you played drums on that hit single. And then I've heard a rumor involving an Our Lady Peace song as well. So can you give us any information about those 2, if that is true, if I am hearing rumors through the grapevine? What's going on here?
Yeah. So along the way, I can't remember when it was, USS, I got a call from their producer that I guess they had a bunch of different guys, drummers, coming in to do some different tracks. And I had never heard that song, Shipwreck. I knew those guys for many years before that. I think the day before, I was playing a show with Adam, before it was Saint Asonia. I was still in Finger 11. I was just doing shows with Adam Gontier on the side. And funny enough, I think I was playing here in Jackson, Michigan, where I live now, when I got a call asking if I was available the next day, tomorrow, to go into the studio and do something with USS. So I went in that day. I had not heard the song. They played me, I guess they played me the demo or the idea of it. And I just kind of went in the live room and sort of played the first thing that came to mind, listening to demos. We just tried a few different things. It's a very simple thing. And I think the drums really went into a machine. It sounds like programmed drums.
It's very programmed. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what went into the process after I left the room that day, but yeah, I went in the studio that day and sat with the 2 guys in the studio and went through the song and tracked it. I remember Jordan from Alexis on Fire was with me that day. Alexis on Fire and Billy Talent now.
Ratbeard himself.
Ratbeard, yeah. The man, yes. I remember he was there that day. I'm not sure if he did something. There were a bunch of different drummers that were coming in and out that day. So yeah, I did Shipwreck, and it became a single on their record. And it's funny because years later, I told my wife, "Have you ever heard of this band USS?" I played the song. I tracked the song with them once, and I played Shipwreck for her, and it was like, she couldn't believe it. She loved that song. And I think in America, that band aren't as popular as they are up in Canada. So she kind of knew it just from her, it just kind of come and gone on her iPod back in the day. She was like, "Oh my God, that band. I never knew who that band was. Holy shit, you're playing drums on that?" It was this funny kind of thing that, yeah, USS Shipwreck. So
they had a sneaky amount of success. Like it's almost like they flew under the radar, but they had like single after single that would pop up and chart. And it's like they didn't break through super mainstream, but it's like they were just always there with an album, with a single, doing well on tours, and eventually I think they've called it quits at this point. But yeah, they had like a sneaky amount of success.
I'll tell you another funny little thing about that time period. At some point, they were going out with Headley at the time, and there was a moment there where I was asked or considered going out and tour with them, and it's just a two-piece, just the two guys and a drummer. I think their drummer's name is Matt. And hi, buddy. I'm talking. Look, I'm talking to you. Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, he's a big mess right now. We're talking about USS.
He's quite photogenic, eh?
So at that point in time, I was going to go on tour with them, opening for Headley, and I'd actually got a hold of Neil from 3 Days Grace because I was going to borrow, or I was trying to find out where they had a drum riser, 3 Days Grace, that went up in the air and spun around on one of their records. So I was trying to find out how to get that drum riser to take that out on tour with USS on the Headley tour. And man, it's all such a sort of a blur right now, how that all kind of did come together. I wasn't really at my best at that moment in time, like mentally. So, but yeah, there was, not only did I play on that song, there was a talk about possibly touring with them, but it never ended up being, so who knows.
Okay. And then with Our Lady Peace, so they had a hit single called Is Anybody Home? I remember having, that must be on the Is Happiness a Fish You Can Catch? I think it's on that album. You redid that song? What is the history with that song?
So yeah, while we were recording Grace the Blue Skies in, I guess, 1998 or 99, they had just finished recording the record with Arnold, and they were already back out on tour, and that was going to be a single. So I think their label had asked if they could do like a simplified version of that, maybe just more condensed. Not that it's a tricky song, but I think they just wanted like a more meat and potatoes version of the song. So we were already in the studio in Toronto with Arnold, and those guys were out on tour. So I think they were asking Jeremy to come back and retrack the drums, and for whatever reason he wasn't able to. So since I was there, I stayed a weekend, and we set up the drums, and we kind of redid a version of Is Anybody Home, which is more much less, like I said, it's not a very tricky song on drums, but they just wanted it much more simplified. So me and Arnold spent a Saturday afternoon redoing the drums on that song. And I don't know if it became like a radio version of the song. I'm not really sure what happened to that, but I definitely recorded a version of it.
Is that version available anywhere?
What's that?
Is that version available anywhere? Like, is it on YouTube, or was it ever released?
That is for your research. I want to know too. I'm not sure. As far as I know, I think it became.
Maybe you were actually on the hit single itself. Maybe you have this big like #1 rock single that you were the drummer on.
I really don't know. I know it was literally done on a Saturday. The other guys went home, and Arnold and me sat, and we just went through the song and really dissected it and made it as simple as possible. And and I re-recorded the song with all the tracks in my ears. Everything's done. I just played to a click track and, in Rain's voice, and I think the bass track, just to pick up on all the parts. But yeah, I'm not sure what became of it after that, but there is a version of me playing that song somewhere.
I'll have my people look into it. We'll find what's going on with that song. We'll get the truth behind that.
Cool. Let me know.
Awesome. So we've already gone an hour. This is turning into another deep dive, which is epic. So let's dive into, so this is the very first edition of my 5 fave albums. So let's dive into them. For our listeners, right off the top, give them the list. What are your 5 favorite albums of all time? You're on a desert island. Somehow you have something there that plays music. You have electricity enough to play 5 albums. What are the albums that you play?
Okay. Well, I made a list. Here is my list. It's these aren't in any order. It's just 1 through 5. So And Justice for All by Metallica, Rumors by Fleetwood Mac, The Wall by Pink Floyd, Raising Hell by Run DMC, and Operation Mindcrime by Queensryche.
This is such an eclectic list of albums. You know, sometimes you would think it'd be all hip hop or all metal or all pop, and in your case, you kind of have one of each genre. So we're gonna dive into all five. Let's start with Metallica's "And Justice for All." So this album comes out in 1988.
Yes.
I have so much to say about this album, but let's get started with, do you remember the first time that you heard this album?
Yes. Sorry, man. Sorry, dude. One second.
I get sad as well sometimes, you know.
Put it down, please. I apologize. I'm trying my best here.
You're doing good, man. You're multitasking. I'm not capable of multitasking, so.
Cool. Okay, so yes, And Justice for All, that's the first heavy metal record that came into my life as a up and coming drummer. Like when I'll talk about some of the other records before we mention, but And Justice for All was the first record that I tried to, as a drummer, sit down, and I was just completely in awe of what was going on the drums. And I mean, I sat and learned every single note of every song on that album. It was the first heavy metal band it was the first. Say hi. I was about his age probably when And Justice for All came out. So yeah, it was one of the highlights of that record was, of course, their song One, you know, the big Metallica song One.
Big breakthrough with the music video that pushed it through to MTV, right?
Yeah, which was their first video they ever did. I think, you know, the double bass part on One, landmark has taken my life. That was the first time I'd ever considered double bass drum or any of that stuff. And it's funny because by today's standards, it's kind of slow, but I still can't play. I'm not a double bass guy. So to play that solidly and successfully now, I still can't say I have that down. But just the drumming on that album, to me, is the most iconic heavy metal drum performance, you know, of them all for me. And it, you know, when you listen back to that record now it's known, And Justice for All doesn't have a very good bass mix.
There's virtually no bass in the mix. I just listened to it, and the bass is virtually non-existent on that mix. It's crazy.
There's no bass, yeah. So I don't know if because of that, I got to tune in more to what what Lars was playing back then, but it was everything about that album, man. It was the first time I saw like long-haired guys banging their head, a drummer with a big drum set, just all of it, you know, the whole heavy metal package for me was And Justice for All. And it was really right as I was becoming, trying to find my way as a drummer, and I was sort of becoming a metal fan, and that came out right at the right time. But yeah, everything to those like long minute And Justice for All songs, it's like, I don't know, like 7 minutes or something. And those long winded, you know, musical parts through its, you know, Harvester of Sorrow, or man, I've got to think of all the songs. I could name them all right now.
Eye of the Beholder, Dire something.
Dire's Eve, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would listen to that album from start to finish back then, and just I would pay attention to every single note played on the drums and relearn it. So it was just such a big deal to me as a kid, you know, to understand. Like I was talking before about that relationship between bass player and the bass drum and the bass player. This record wasn't so much that for me. It was more about the relationship between a drummer and his role in the band, and what you could kind of do, kind of how much you could do and get away with, where it would still make sense. Roman, come here. Come here. Man, oh man. Now I got a kid climbing on the table. I tell you what, podcasts for me at 46 years old are a lot different than they used to be.
Oh, it's
That
all
was
good.
it.
That's all good. That and Justice for All was that was an important transition album because you had the unfortunate death of Cliff Burton after Master of Puppets, and this is where Jason Newsted came in. So new bass player on this album, leading to the Black Album afterwards.
Right.
So it's a transition, and then it's like heartbreaking that he comes in, and then they decide it's basically um, James and Lars that decide that in the mix they want the bass lower and lower and lower. So Jason comes in, and his first album they basically muted him, and it makes sense later on why he ends up leaving Metallica. Like that, that's a tough spot to be.
Yeah, I know. And there you can hear now. I'm not sure how they do this online, but there's like those. Come here. There's these versions online of like with the bass up. I'm not sure if it's a real thing, but man, that album would have sounded so incredible with the bass up. But still, I mean, that's how I know that record as it sounds. It's still magical to me because it's all about the drums and the guitar on that, So yeah, to me, I love the sound of that record. I'm not a bass player, but when I do listen back with that bass up on YouTube, it's like, man, that's, what were they thinking? But it's such an iconic record. I think because of how it sounds, it's what stands out.
Yeah, there's all these comments in the years since then about the bass not being audible in the mix, and I have a quote here from the producer. So the producer of the album said in 2018, so like way later, he said, "I'm probably one of the only people in the world, including Jason, the bassist, and Toby Wright, the assistant engineer, who heard the bass tracks on And Justice for All. And I have to say, they're freaking brilliant." So it sounds like he had like incredible bass playing, and it was James, in James's defense of the mix, he felt that Jason was mostly just playing what the guitars were doing, and he felt that he couldn't hear the difference between the guitars and the bass, so he kept shaving off the bass for the guitars to pierce through. That's his defense of why the mix is the way it is. But it's definitely a strange sounding album with the bass.
It is. It's unusual. It's very high endy and like clicky, but I mean, it when it comes on. I don't know. I think it's an amazing sounding record. I don't know. Of course, I just grew up to it, so I don't know. It's killer to me. For me, definitely the most important Metallica record in my life.
Do you remember the Grammy controversy at all around that album? Do you remember this?
Oh, is it Jethro Tull thing?
Yeah. Yeah, so 1989, Metallica and these other bands are getting so popular, they're pushing metal to the mainstream, just like hip hop was underground and eventually goes mainstream by the help of one of your top 5 albums of all time with Run DMC. So in 1989, the Grammys finally clue into this, and for the first time ever, they add a like best metal performance. And Metallica is hot off of And Justice for All. Even though they're like underground, they're selling out arenas. One breaks through on MTV with the music video. They sell like 8 million copies, even though they're underground. They're one of the best-selling artists in the world. They're a shoe-in for it's almost like they were so undeniable with what they were doing that the Grammys made a category that obviously Metallica was going to be the inaugural winners. And then Jethro Tull wins, and they're not even considered metal or hard rock. They were just kind of rock. They have like flutes and stuff, like instruments that are like embarrassing to play in a rock or metal band, and they win. And it's considered one of the biggest Grammy snubs of all time. And what's kind of cool for Metallica is the success of that album continued into the next year. So at the Grammys the year after, Metallica won their very first Grammy. And when Lars got up to accept the award, what he said was, "I'd like to thank Jethro Tull for not putting out an album this year," which was pretty awesome. So I remember that controversy. It's still like one of the biggest things in music lore when it comes to metal.
I do remember all that. Yeah. I mean, God, Jethro Tull, so amazing. But yeah, to be in the same category as Metallica didn't make a ton of sense. Roman, I'm sorry. Roman, come here.
That's all good. I discovered something pretty shocking. So they had, so Fleming Rasmussen, hopefully I'm saying the name correctly. So he had produced Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets. And he ended up eventually producing And Justice for All. But apparently at the start of the recording, he wasn't available. So it was actually the producer, so Mike Klink, who did Appetite for Destruction for Guns N' Roses. He's actually the one that started the recording of And Justice for All. And they got him just because their other dude wasn't available. So this Mike Klink, he started the recording of that album. And then eventually Fleming became available. And they literally just kicked out the guy that had started the album. So the album And Justice for All was almost produced by the same producer as Guns N' Roses Appetite for Destruction, which is wild.
And very interesting you say that. Mike Klink, a good friend of mine, Les Stroud from Canada, from the TV show Survivor Man, is a good pal of mine. And actually Mike Klink just produced his record. So he went up to Muskoka. Where the heck does Les live? Anyway, yeah, Mike was up in Canada recently doing Les Stroud's record. So yeah, he's out there supporting the Canadian Survivor Man.
So Master of Puppets is Metallica's most acclaimed album, and the Black Album is their best-selling and I would say most popular album as far as sales go, and in the general population. So I wanted to do this deep dive with you about this album to know, despite one being another album being more acclaimed, another one being more well-known and better selling, I wanted to know why this album specifically is the one in your top 5. And it's cool to hear that it had such a big impact on you as a youngster getting into drumming.
Yeah, it's all about the drumming. As a young drummer, to me, And Justice for All, it was learning every single note on that record, verbatim. And of course, yeah, and still to this day, that's why I mention it. It's still just, when I think of Metallica, I think of And Justice and Master of Puppets. I mean, all of those records before, but just for me, where I was in my life, particularly at that time, that was the heaviest shit and the most complicated, drum wise stuff that I'd ever heard. And it was, like I said, the first introduction to the double bass, in particular, that one thing, that still is the coolest thing ever. And still something I cannot play properly. I don't know if there, but anyway.
Yeah. I don't know if this is on purpose, but the part you're describing, that part. So the song in the music video, they're about like the horrors of war. And to me, that part sounds like gunfire. It sounds like, and when you see them live, that song, it's crazy, man. So I've seen them in Ottawa with Godsmack opening like 18 years ago. I saw them in Toronto. I have tickets for the upcoming 2-night concert with Pantera, who some of the members, and with a Five Finger Death Punch. So I'm excited for that. But when I saw them in Ottawa, their setup, they were playing that song. And as it got to that part that we're talking about, suddenly the lights are going weird and the stage, there's smoke, and the whole stage collapses into rubble. Like, this is the craziest technology. So they're playing, and then suddenly the guitar cuts out, and then a light like blows out, and then there's smoke, and then the stage collapses, and you're like, oh my God, like, what's going on? Is this a tragedy? What's happening? And then out of the rubble, members start coming out with the and it's like they recreated being in war and coming out of the trenches, and again, where that to me sounds like guns in war. It's so wild, man, what people can do beyond just the music,
Yeah, I remember. I'm not sure if it's the same tour that you're talking about, but they used to have this like pratfall thing every night, where I think we're talking about the same thing. The lighting fixture started falling down. A guy like caught on fire, came running out, one of their crew guys, and they sort of staged this like disaster every night that happened and tried to like make it off like it was happening in real time. So I think that's the same thing. I don't remember the band guys coming out, but it's just amazing. The Metallica machine, that they're able to put on those performances the memorable performances that you're talking about, man. I've seen Metallica so many times over the years as well. And I'll be going to see them this summer as well, with some of my buddies are opening up for them. So yeah, they just don't stop, man. They're amazing. And their new song, I don't know, when I hear new Metallica songs, like I love Metallica so much. They're such a part of my DNA. But I'm just like, I just love the old stuff. You know, I'm always supporting them. I'm always wanting more stuff to come. But I think it's called Lux Eterna is their new song. It's like, it's cool, man. I'm just,
it's a throwback to more of the thrash sound than the rock sound, you know?
Yeah. Whatever.
Are you excited for the new album, or you don't care too much anymore?
No, I mean, I always care. I always care for Metallica. I could never say I don't care. It'd be so disrespectful.
You want to hear what's coming, like just to be able to put on headphones and dive into like another, you know, hour of new creations from this all-time great band. That's always exciting. I have a confession. I even like what are considered to be Metallica's worst albums. Like, you know,
which is what
like Load and Reload or Saint Anger, or those ones. Like, you know, Metallica, because they've released, you know, 2, 3, 4 all-time great metal albums. It's like there's this pinnacle that's hard to recreate. And I remember seeing a Lars comment where he said, you know, even our worst albums, he thinks are at least like a certain point. Like he says, you know, I forget what the quote is, but essentially, if any other band, like if I started a metal band today and our band put out the worst Metallica album, we'd be like so proud of that album, you know, and we'd probably have hit singles with it, and it would be great. So anyways, a confession that I like even what's considered the worst Metallica albums. I like almost every song on them, to be honest. You know, sometimes the production choices are a little strange and the mixing's a little strange, but yeah.
Anger record will always be you know, it'll always be what it is. But I think
the garbage can snare, that must be hard as a drummer to hear that.
I think Death Magnetic, that record they did with Rick Rubin, every song on that album, it sounds like Rick listened to this song and like, okay, this song needs to be the Creeping Death song of the record. And then this needs to be the Harvester of Sorrow song on this record. And this song, you can literally hear every track on there as like a paying homage to an old song, which I don't know. It's interesting. They did it so well. Rick Rubin delivered it so well. I love that album, man. To me, if you put on Death Magnetic, it's like all of Metallica's career up till then in one record. But Saint Anger, man, gosh, I try. I can't. I
like Hardwired to Self-Destruct. Like I'm just like a big Metallica fan.
I like the tick 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 tock. There's something, you know, there's a hook there, but I don't know.
Saint Anger and Some Kind of Monster. Yeah, they had 3 singles on that one. I have just 2 questions left about the Metallica album. These are the 2 hardest Metallica questions that can be asked. Are you ready for these? These are tough.
Sure am.
Is it, when you look at the entire discography for Metallica, is Lars overrated or underrated as a drummer?
He's right where he belongs. He's right where he should be, man. He's an integral part of the band. I don't know what overrated or I mean, I guess I know what underrated is, but he's gotten a lot of slack over the years. I'll tell you this, in my opinion, Lars's drum parts over the years have been the most important part of my musical growth and development, learning how to play those parts from day one, you know. So, you know, like judging Metallica now, like or Lars as a drummer now in his 60s, I'm so happy that he's there still keeping that massive machine moving, and he goes on stage and he plays those songs. We're so used to guys now that are, you know, the level of drumming or like the level of skateboarding or the level of everything has gone up so much that I mean, when I was a kid, if you could do a kickflip on skateboard. Yeah, that was insane. But now it's the same thing with drummers. It's like, so I have to respect and love. Sorry, kid falling. You okay? I gotta love what Lars has brought to the table throughout the last 30, 40 years as a drummer. And just not as a drummer, but as a businessman. He's made Metallica a monster machine. He's created that band. He's turned that band into this colossal business. So there's just more to it than just Lars the drummer. But if I'm just talking about as Lars the drummer, he's so crucial to me in my development that I don't need to judge him right now in his 60s as a drummer. I just need to think of him as the guy that I grew up with. I mean, if I'm at that age and I'm still selling out stadiums, I'm Lars, I mean, God bless him. He's kicking ass in my opinion, whatever. It doesn't matter if he's what everyone says about him online. I have full love and respect for him.
Yeah, I guess the question stems from me hearing both sides of that, where I've heard drummers that say when they were growing up and they were listening to the Black Album, before they became drummers, they heard those albums and they had Lars up there on a pedestal as like the greatest drummer of all time. And then as they themselves became great and proficient drummers, they realized that, oh, his drumming isn't that complicated. So I've heard one side of it, but then I think, you're not muted. No, you're good. And then oh, it's all good. And then the other side of it is, sometimes you hear that he's actually underrated, where his drum parts are so unique and so memorable, and they're just very original and strange and different. And like, you can't picture other drummers being able to come up with the drum parts that he has. So I hear both sides of it being overrated and underrated. So I just wanted your opinion on it. And I think, the drum parts that he's laid down to tape over the years, some of them are undeniably, epic.
They are, man. You gotta, it's so easy for people to jump on, on musicians as they get older and age. But yeah, he's one of the most crucial, or if not the most crucial, heavy metal drummer of all time. And he's taken that genre for all of the bands to come after him into such a huge, I mean, the fact they can still sell out stadiums and stuff, and I got nothing but respect. And that album Forever, I mean, I can still put it on and try to drum to it. And it's like, it's so challenging, I hope one day I got a chance to meet them. I've not met anybody in Metallica. I hope I do one day. And I hope I get to tell them that, face to face one day.
Awesome. So final difficult Metallica question. Before that, can you flip the camera landscape again? And just because it makes for there we go. We got the full widescreen mode. Final question. This one's tough. Was Bob Rock good or bad for Metallica? Tough question. So without Bob Rock, you don't have the Black Album, which brings metal to the mainstream and brings Metallica to the biggest band in the world. But then you have albums that, the people that love the first 3 or 4 Metallica albums think that Bob Rock, because of after the Black Album, they think that Bob Rock was the worst thing that happened to Metallica. Where do you stand on Bob Rock?
No, I think Bob Rock was, I mean, the Black Album is Metallica is obviously their biggest record today. I think I wish he would have done the last few again. I kind of wish that Metallica would have went back to the original. The guy that you mentioned his name from Injustice for All, the Swedish guy,
Rasmussen. Yeah,
it would be cool to hear him and Bob Rock and Rick Rubin all together.
That would be cool.
The next record, yeah. I think Bob Rock, completely took Metallica into another level. I mean, that album sounds so fucking incredible. Every song,
Sad But True, the drums on Sad But True are such monster. Yeah.
Ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it's funny because as I know the Our Lady Peace guys, other bands that have gone and worked with Bob Rock over the years, it's like with Finger 11, actually, I always brought his name up as far as, who might want to produce our next record. And the guys were never really interested in pursuing that direction. But man, I think Bob's amazing. The sound, his contribution to songs, like with Our Lady Peace, there's the Arnold Lanny Our Lady Peace records that are those records, and then there's the Bob Rock Our Lady Peace records. Just like with Metallica, there's the each definitive producer they work with at the time. But yeah, I got nothing but great things to say about Bob Rock. I think he's really a huge part of that band, and I bet you he'll come back to them at some point. It'd be cool. Wouldn't it be cool to hear like a new Metallica record with him?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's amazing about Bob Rock and his confidence in what he does as a producer, so when Metallica was at the peak, before the Black Album, when they were at the peak of And Justice for All, they had sold millions of albums, they're selling out arenas. Bob Rock goes up to them and says, "Hey, despite all that success, I still don't think you've captured the essence of Metallica on record yet." And they had already done some of the greatest albums of all time with Master of Puppets and, Ride the Lightning and Kill 'Em All and all that. So that's what they said that's what he said to Metallica. And at first they were taken aback, like, who's this guy? Like, how dare he? And eventually they came around to it thinking like, we need to put our egos aside and maybe he is right. And that's what led to them working with him on the Black Album. So it's wild to think he went up to Metallica and said that. So
yeah, to have the balls that's what makes a great producer, to go up to these guys, and sometimes the things that they don't want to hear, I think, is what makes a great producer. And still, man, that album sonically sounds so fucking badass, And I know that Load and Reload were done with him as well. And I don't know if I've ever actually listened through those full records, but songs like Of Wolf and Man and what Into the Never, is it called? Into the Never, I think. There's so many songs on the Black Album that you kind of forget about that are. Of Wolf and Man really stands out to me. It's such badass songs, man. That thing is,
dude, there was Nothing Else Matters, Enter Sandman, The Unforgiven, Wherever I May Roam. Like, there was 5 massive hit singles. Holier Than Thou. Holier Than Thou was actually supposed to be the first single, not Enter Sandman. And because they wanted to keep that like super heavy thrash metal going, and then someone knew that the actual mainstream breakthrough would be Enter Sandman. So they, with the ego and not wanting to the sellout or whatever, they were against it, and they ended up going with Enter Sandman. And to this day, the Black Album is the best-selling album in US history on SoundScan. So since SoundScan started in 1991, no album has sold more in the US than the Black Album, even up to today. That's how big that album was.
Wow. Yeah. Well, it's got to be over 100 million now, right? I'm sure. Something like
that. No, I don't think there's any album that sold 100 million. So the best-selling album of all time switches between Michael Jackson Thriller and between the Eagles Greatest Hits. They're both around 60 million, like globally. And they switch because they're so close. So one year, one will jump the other. But that's about 60 million. So I think the Black Album is probably about 25 million globally, but in the US, it sold well over 16 million since 1991, which is wild. There were years, man, since like the downloading and the iTunes and the Napster years, the best-selling album of the year would be like 2.3 million. Like, just to show how crazy 16 point whatever million albums. That's, if you were in Canada, that's every second person you meet in Canada has Metallica the Black Album, to show how many 16 million albums is. It's wild.
I've recently, in the last couple of years, Joe from the Eagles is we become acquaintances.
Joe Walsh?
Yeah.
Is that Joe Walsh? Yeah.
So this is a sort of random side story, but
I did mention the Eagles, so I brought it on myself. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, so Joe was saying a few months ago, when COVID was at its peak, they were doing I think like 4 or 5 nights at Madison Square Garden, and during conversation, Joe was saying like, man, it's like the third night. We're still in our hotel. We're still getting, we don't know if tonight's going to be canceled. During that conversation, I was thinking to myself, like, he's so randomly and casually saying, we've sold out 5 or 6 nights at Madison Square Garden. Yeah, we don't know what's going on tonight. It's just like baffling, yeah, the Eagles' success. But yeah, he's such a great dude, man. Joe's amazing.
My favorite story about the Eagles is there was a point where they weren't really doing anything anymore as a band. They weren't touring. And in an interview, one of the members got asked, like, hey, when are the Eagles going to tour again? And they said, when hell freezes over. Like, it's never going to happen. And then years later, they come back with the Hell Freezes Over tour, which I just think is like the most clever thing that's ever happened in rock history. So, okay, so we are an hour and a half into the interview and we got through album number 1. So this is a true deep dive with the top 5 favorite albums. So we're way over here with metal, talking about Metallica, and we're going to go all the way to the other end of the spectrum and we're going to dive into pop music. So let's talk about Fleetwood Mac, Rumors, another all-time great album. What do you have to say about that album as far as maybe the first time you heard it? What makes it great and why does it mean so much to you?
Yeah, that album for me, I always, when we were setting up this to talk about this, thinking, my top 5 records, Rumors is always there. It's where Metallica is like a sort of a genre, and I can think of it as from a drummer standpoint, as a young drummer and stuff. Rumors is like just, from front to back, the best collection of songs. And it for me, it wasn't so much that, which is everything. I mean, the most incredible songs. When I found out that what was going on during the creation of that record, that there was all these relationships going on, and to know that there's these 2 different couples in the band that are divorcing or breaking up, or in some instances sleeping with each other, like they were going back and forth with band members.
A lot of heavy drug use within all that chaos too,
Tons of heavy drug use. And just when you hear the lyrics on that record, every song is like kind of written to somebody else in the band. And just picturing that they were in the studio at that time, like drug fueled, like you were saying, but like staring across the room at somebody and singing those lyrics about somebody, and then that person is harmonizing with them, singing along with them. It's the most dramatic record to me. As far as like really laying your soul out,
yeah,
world about your relationship. And oh Jesus, man, I'm sorry, dude. This is the most child intertwined interview ever, but
it's all good, man. We're giving the people what they want. They want to see what life is like,
This is kid throwing stuff. That's why I keep moving around my house, as I'm sure people will see, but I'm trying to keep it as quiet as I can. But yeah, Fleetwood Mac, Rumors. The reason I named that as one of my favorite records is just lyrically, to be writing that stuff about one another in the band. Now I gotta move it. To be writing that stuff about band members while they're sitting across from you in the studio, to be on that, that many drugs at the time, and just for each member of the band to be such strong, active songwriters on each song on the record. I mean, it's the perfect record. And it was one of those records, again, like I was talking about Injustice for All. That was when I was young as a drummer. That was just one of those instant things. But I think Rumors is one of those records that, as I became older and, I guess more knowledgeable in songwriting and just all that kind of stuff, it just became, I kind of got how important that record was, to not just as a drummer, but as a songwriter. That's kind of like the songwriter record for me.
The relationships in that band were so bad that none of the members actually talked outside of working on music in the recording studio. Like they had zero relationship, and
Right.
they would clock in together, and they were able to shut off the personal stuff. And just like they went to work and, you know, they don't like their job and it doesn't matter, they would clock in, and it was just other musicians working on their craft to make the best songs, to make the best album they can.
Right.
And when they left, that was it. They weren't friends. They didn't talk. And it's so wild to be able to turn off and turn on those things and be that much of a professional as a musician.
For sure. For sure. Oh
So
Joel, I cannot find a place in this house quiet.
There is no escaping.
Especially, so just to give you some context here, I'm by myself this weekend. My wife is away in Florida, so I've got my kids, my stepkids, and my baby. So I'm trying to make this interview happen, walking around the house all while doing this. So if people are listening to this, I apologize. Try my best.
No, man, you're doing awesome. I'm horrible at multitasking. So you're keeping the conversation going. I would not be able to focus at all. So you're doing awesome. When I actually came across this album because Rolling Stone magazine put out their list of 500 greatest albums of all time. And I actually listened to all 500 of them. So this took me like a year. Like I don't know, that's hundreds and hundreds of hours. And they had, out of all the albums of all time, they had Rumors at number 7, the seventh greatest album of all time. And when you look at all-time great album lists, Rumors is always there in the top 10, universally agreed upon as one of the greatest albums of all time. And I remember listening to it and being so impressed. I was already familiar with the 4 hit singles, but I didn't know the deeper cuts on the album. But I was really impressed with how eclectic the music is. It's like all the musicians in that band are amazing songwriters themselves, and they bring a different voice and a different sound and a different style, and they had such different instrumentation. They'd have one piano bass, one acoustic guitar bass, one electric bass, one more synthesizer. One song was like acoustic or pop, and I was so impressed. It was just like such a wide breadth of great music, a great collection of songs. So I can't say I can't say enough good things about that album.
Me too. I agree with you. Yeah, it's the full package. I mean, it stands up, you know, like still, I could put that whole record on today, and, you know, from start to finish, just every song is a complete classic. And then again, as a drummer, the playing is so unique. The way that Mick adds to those songs, there's I don't know, he's such a unique drummer. You could tell that he's more in that band than just the drummer, that he's a principal songwriter as well. There's parts of that song where he's playing on his kick and snare, and then he'll go to his floor tom with the snare, boom, and it's he does that a lot on those records, especially that record, that the snare and floor tom together gives it some weight that I don't know if like a lot of people even hear that he's doing that, but he's such an important part of that band and such a integral drummer, you know. I think, you know, he's not the most flashy drummer in the world, but like it's like Ringo Starr, like trying to play a Fleetwood Mac song properly is you know, it takes you really got to pick up on all the nuances, just like with Ringo Starr. You hear my son in the back yelling. I cannot get.
Well, he can't get enough of you, that's nice, you know?
Yeah.
That's all good. So over the years, Mick Fleetwood has said that Rumors is the band's most important album they ever made because it allowed them to continue recording for years afterwards. It was like such a monumental. It stayed at number 1 for over half a year. Like, despite every week new albums coming out, nothing could dethrone it for half a year. I mean, you don't see that anymore. That's like unparalleled. When looking into this album, so I'm always looking at who the musicians were playing on it, who the producers, who mixed it, all that stuff. And the producer, so I see the name Ken Calais, and I'm like, Okay, that last name is not super apparent all the time. You don't see that. And there's a singer, that a platinum singer, Colby Calais. Have you ever heard of Colby Calais? So she had a huge song called Bubbly and Realize. She had a hit with Jason Mraz called Lucky.
Right.
I've seen her in concert. Uh, that's
Huh.
actually that's actually the father of Colby Calais. So the producer
Oh
of
wow.
Fleetwood Mac Rumors is the father of the multi-platinum singer-songwriter Colby Calais, which I did not know until this deep dive interview, which is pretty
Huh.
cool.
I didn't know that either. Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I have a quick funny story about Colby Calais. So I was
Mhm.
living in Toronto, and a friend from Ottawa was coming to visit me, and we were going to time it with a concert that he wanted to see in Toronto. So I sent him a list of like the next 3 months, what's coming, and it's like you could pick Coheed and Cambria, you could pick all these badass bands, and he says, "I want to go see Colby Calais." And I like Colby, but it's like of all the concerts, so he chooses that one. So him and I, two dudes, go see Colby Calais, soft rock. And at one point, she does a cover of the Pussycat Dolls, Don't Ya? So the song, Don't You Wish Your Girlfriend Was Hot Like Me? So
Yeah.
when that song is done, there's a moment where there's silence between when they finish and when they start up the next song. And I decide to yell out in the silence with like 3,000 people. I yell out, "I wish my girlfriend was hot like you." And the whole crowd gasped because they assumed like I had a girlfriend with me. And Colby on stage actually like covers her face and goes, "I'm sure your girlfriend is very nice." Like she had to defend my hypothetical girlfriend that wasn't there because I was there with a
Right.
dude. So, and then I
Amazing.
saw a review the next day where they reviewed the show and they said, Colby Calais even did a fiery cover of the Pussycat Dolls "Don't Ya," which prompted a audience member to yell out whatever. So it made the news the next day, which was pretty cool. Anyways, a random Colby Calais story, which has ties in with her producer father who produced this album. So some random stuff for you there.
Well, hold on. I'll tell you another random thing mentioning the Pussycat Dolls that you probably don't know. Um, so years and years ago, touring with the band with Finger 11, we were touring with the band Days of the New. If you remember those guys.
Acoustic, right? They're mostly acoustic rock.
Yeah. So back in the day, they had this singer with them. Travis is the singer of that band. He used to have this backup singer in the band that, we when we were on tour, met a bunch of times. And I do remember her name was Nicole. And like years later, I was watching Pussycat Dolls, all these like videos when that band became what they were. And I was like, man, that girl looks so familiar. And I kind of Googled it. And
Nicole Scherzinger.
yeah, she used to be the backup singer for Days of the New.
Wow.
Came from, yeah. So we had toured with them, and that girl was singing on stage with Days of the New, which is so bizarre, man. But yeah, there it
Days
is.
of the New was awesome. It's like they were metal, but they played acoustic guitar. Like they had badass riffs, but on acoustic. I think it
Yeah.
was Touch, Peel, and Stand was like the big hit single. There was a couple more. So we were talking about the best-selling albums of all time. So we were talking about Michael Jackson, Thriller, the Eagles' greatest hits. So Rumors has sold 40 million albums globally, which in the US, it's the 11th best-selling album of all time. So this is like a all-time great best-selling album. I actually, just for fun, went back and found a few original reviews of the album, which I think paint a picture for our listeners. So our listeners that have not heard this album, I have a few quick quotes that might get you to go and listen to this album in a bit here. So in a retrospective review, AllMusic said the record was an unparalleled blockbuster because of the music's quality. He then concluded, each tune, each phrase regains its raw, immediate, and emotional power, which is why Rumors touched a nerve in 1977 and has since transcended its era to be one of the greatest, most compelling pop albums of all time. And I have a couple more here. Slant magazine said Fleetwood Mac drew on romantic dysfunction, which is what you talked about, and personal turmoil to create a timeless 5-star record. Stylus magazine said what distinguishes Rumors, what makes it art, is the contradiction between its cheerful surface and its anguished heart. Here is a radio-friendly record about anger, recrimination, and loss. And final review, the BBC said it is a near perfect album. And this is like my favorite quote. It says, The album is like 1,000 angels kissing you sweetly on the forehead.
Uh,
Damn. If ever I could get a review of one of my albums, something like that, that is like all-time great review.
that's the quote you want for your record for sure. Yeah, it's so true, man. And
It's a beautiful album. Like it's, you can't say an album, you can't say many albums are beautiful, but there's something about that album as a whole that there's like this beauty to it.
I wanted to, when you were asking me about these records today to pick through, I was trying, because there's so many records, but part of that, trying to figure out what I would choose was that like from start to finish thing. And Rumors and Justice for All have that, turn it on and leave it on till the end and then let it play again. So
All killer, no filler. Yeah.
Like Sum 41, like Derek told us.
Yeah. So I guess the last thing I would say about that album, do you remember a couple of years ago when the song Dreams went viral again because of a TikTok video? Do you remember this at all?
I don't.
So during the pandemic, a random dude goes skateboarding. So it's this short clip on TikTok. This older, I don't know, older gentleman gets on a skateboard. The song Dreams is playing in the background, and he's skateboarding down a slope and he's drinking ocean spray, like cranberry juice or whatever. And
Yes.
it was like a vibe, like a chill skateboarder, just, hydrating himself, listening to the song. And that video went so viral that the song back in like 77 was a #1 global hit. It became a top 10 hit globally again, all these years later. And it was so popular that the band itself kept recreating that video. So then, Stevie Nicks made a video of, instead of skateboarding, it was her rollerblading, drinking ocean spray, and then Ocean Spray got involved and sponsored the band, and that guy was sent like a truckload of ocean spray that went viral. And anyways, it's funny, the band had a massive resurgence, and when you listen to radio in 2020, you would hear like all current songs and Dreams. Like Dreams was a legit, like it was a new hit again in 2020. It was wild.
Yeah, that when you said that, I remember that all comes back to me. It's so funny that Ocean Spray of all like awful unhydrated
like cranberry juice or something.
Yeah, like sugar and but that's cool, man. I remember that. Yeah, killer album, killer everything.
So before we dive into album number 3, I have another fan question for you. Are you ready for a fan question? This is from Mike Dunn. Hopefully I'm saying the last name right. This is from the same Finger 11 fan crew on Facebook. He says, ask Rich what his favorite album is to drum to, not to listen to drum to. And has he ever accidentally bitten his own face while drumming? And I asked him, is it possible to bite one's own face? Like, do you mean just like biting your own lip while drumming? He said, no, biting his own face. So I don't know what this means. There's got to be an inside joke here. What is your answer for your favorite album to drum to? And then if you bit your own face, Mike wants to know.
All right. Hey, Mike. I know Mike very well, man. From the first few days joining the band, I got to know Mike, and he's been a huge supporter and man, such a good dude all throughout the year. So yeah. How you doing, man? Thanks for asking me the question, Mike. And I guess I know what you mean by that comment. I'm sure I definitely have had drumstick splinters in my eyes along here. Like I've had my eyes literally bleeding before coming off stage, in my teeth. Yeah, so I guess it's all part of the, putting on a good performance, I guess, is sometimes there's going to be some injuries in it. And I guess that's what he means. But definitely have had all that kind of stuff happen to me. As far as playing, what record would I play to that I don't really listen to? I think Dream Theater, Images and Words. Dream Theater's first record that came out. It's like they're a prog rock kind of that kind of singing band. But Mike Portnoy, their drummer, I've been playing along to their records since I was a kid, since their album first came out. So I don't really listen to Dream Theater anymore, but if I'm just at home, in my little drum shed playing, I'll put on, Pull Me Under or Metropolis, which is a like 9-minute Dream Theater song. I'll play that. So yeah, that's probably the record that I would choose for, I don't tell everyone that I'm playing to, but that keeps my chops up. Some old Dream Theater with Mike Portnoy on drums. So thanks, Mike.
So during the pandemic, everything goes into lockdowns, events stop, concerts stop. So picture this. It's been, 2 years since I've been to a concert. The very first concert that I see when things open up, sorry, the band we're talking about right now, Dream Theater. I see Dream Theater in Montreal. Yes. So imagine, I have not experienced any live music in 2 years. And then the very first thing I see is like all-time great musicianship just melting my face. So it was an experience. Yes. I was so happy to be back at live music. And in the first band to welcome me back is like the band that you want to see live. So that was pretty awesome.
Did they play Metropolis in Montreal?
The venue Metropolis?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So they played at the not the arena, like the Bell Center, but Place Bell, which is in Laval. So it's weird. There's two arenas that sound like the Bell Center. One is the big, like 22,000 person NHL arena. And then a little outside of the city, also sponsored by Bell, it's maybe like 3,000 or 4,000. So it's like a more intimate arena. And that's where I saw them.
Oh, I didn't realize they were that big up there. That's cool. Yeah, great band, man. I love those guys since their first record came out. So cool.
But awesome. It'd be cool if they played their Metropolis album at Metropolis.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
That would be the thing to do. So let's dive into your third favorite album of all time. So we're talking Pink Floyd, The Wall. So yes. give me the goods on this. This is the greatest concept album of all time. This is like what made concept albums a thing, and yeah, so many bands we have another concept album coming up in your top 5. Why The Wall? Pink Floyd has, in a span of just 4 albums, they put out The Wall, they put out Dark Side of the Moon, and they put out Wish You Were Here, which is in my top 3 albums of all time. Yeah. That's 3 out of 4 album span is 3 of the all-time greats. Why does The Wall stand out to you?
I think it was just always in my house, growing up. The Wall, those songs were, I was born in Wales, of course, in Cardiff, Wales. That album is just so British, from the little sound bites in between.
The accents and the skits. Yeah.
Yeah. The little skits. Just probably that record for me is the least like drum record for me. It's just about putting it on from start to finish. It's the experience. And I didn't really understand the story of The Wall till years later. Like there's another record we're going to talk about coming up where I kind of knew the storyline more, as far as records like that have a storyline. But it's just song to song. I could have The Wall playing all the time in the background and just in repeat, and it never ever gets old. They're the most classic songs. I don't know what I could say about it that people just don't know. It's The Wall. I mean, it's perfect. That album is absolutely perfect in every way. It sets such a tone, I could be driving, I could be working, anything I'm doing in the day. If that album's in the background, the day just seems to fly by, and everything is so familiar to me, every single song. And it's just, it's like that song when you're in the shower, it's The Wall. I could sing full blast to everything. It's just the perfect record to me. Where we were talking about Fleetwood Mac, Rumors, that's like the relationship album. The Wall is, to me, just like the driving, in your car on your cassette tape. That's what it always was to me. It was always there. And it really taught me a lot about, like I was saying, everything except drums. I was never really listening as a drummer to The Wall. I was just listening to the songwriting, to the lyrics, just really to the production. Just that album really taught me a lot about the ambiance of how to make a record, the message of a record. and like the colors of a record. You know, it wasn't so much about the articulation about one's playing. I mean, of course, if you're a guitar player, that's the album you want to learn, you know, every guitar solo from. But as a drummer, it wasn't so much that for me. Not to say that it's not incredible in that way, but it's just it's the full picture. You know, it's like it's a movie. You know, every time, literally, it's a movie. I can still put on the wall. I love showing, like, for example, my kids. I put on the wall recently, and I just kind of watched their reaction to it, and those little sound bites in between. You know, if you can't eat your pudding, you know, all that stuff. I see Roman reacting to that stuff, like his ears perk up. Doesn't really know what he's hearing yet, but I remember being that age and hearing those sound bites. So yeah, it just feels so very British to me. Being a British kid, it's like that just needs to be in my list of the top 5 records, because it was always there. It just reminds me of home. It reminds me of my family. It reminds me of being in my living room as a kid. You know, it's all that stuff. And it sounds so fucking good. You know, yeah. I mean, I don't know what I can say about The Wall. It's The Wall, man. It's perfect.
It featured like 2 of the most iconic songs of all time, with Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 and with Comfortably Numb. And
of course,
you're talking about, you know, the tasty guitar stuff that's on there. What's funny is my 2 favorite guitar solos of all time. It's 2 of the bands we've mentioned. So Metallica, but on a different album, on the Black Album, The Unforgiven. So that's one of my 2 favorite guitars. Just the vibe is amazing. And then Comfortably Numb, the guitar solo in Comfortably Numb is probably my all-time favorite guitar solo. There's like 2 different guitar solos in that song, and the 2 combined, but especially the second part, it just like takes these notes up into like space territory, just these high otherworldly notes that are like from another universe or from the future. So that's what one of the things that stands out to me is, man, the guitar work. David Gilmour.
I love that. It takes it into space territory. That's the quote right there of the interview. I wish it was mine, but it was yours. Yeah, it takes it into space territory. That's
dude,
cool.
so good. I'm not gonna lie. So I went back and listened to your 5 favorite albums to make sure that I knew them inside and out. And I listened to the first 4. And when I got to The Wall, I knew I had to do this. I'm not gonna lie, I had a little weed gummy, and then I listened to this album because I wanted to get taken into the spectacle that is the double album, The Wall. One thing that I learned years ago that I don't know if many people know this, and I was shocked to learn this. Double albums. So albums like Pink Floyd's The Wall or Smashing Pumpkins, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, double albums. I did not know this, but certifications for double albums, they're doubled. So for example, the Smashing Pumpkins double album was certified diamond, which is 10 million copies sold, but it's actually 5 million. And because it's 2 discs, it's considered having sold 2 albums or 2 discs. So when you hear a double album that gets a certification, so let's say Red Hot Chili Peppers Stadium Arcadium double album went platinum, it actually sold 500,000 copies, but there's 2 discs in each one.
I see.
So I never knew that. That was that caught me off guard when I learned that years ago. So Pink Floyd's The Wall sold over 30 million copies, making it the best-selling double album of all time. But as an insider, I know that's 15 million copies of The Wall sold. That includes 2 discs that are each counted towards certification. So dropping some random nerdy music knowledge for you there.
And you just mentioned Smashing Pumpkins record. That should be close on my list too. God, I love that record. I love the Smashing Pumpkins, man. But yeah, that's really cool. I did not know that. It makes total sense as far as the record sales numbers go. Yeah,
because they actually charged more. Like when you went out and got a regular album, it would be, I don't know, $12, $15. And sometimes you went to get a double album and it was 20, 21, 23. So it's like they accounted for the extra money that was in there. So I had no idea. I never knew that was the thing. What blows my mind is when The Wall first came out, it actually received lukewarm reviews. It's like people didn't get it. They thought it was pretentious. They thought it was bloated. And it's over the years that it's become like a fine wine where people started to appreciate, and it's now listed on every list of the greatest albums of all time. So it's kind of funny how we don't appreciate things at first, or maybe we're not ready for it. Like it's ahead of its time.
Yeah, but that's, yeah, I know. Yeah, I think that first tour they did where they built that wall, I don't know if well that sold as well. But yeah, man, oh my God, that's one of those records that my grandchildren will be discovering. You know, I guess all these albums we're talking about, especially The Wall and Rumors, are those that, you know, for hundreds of years, those will be there. But yeah, man, such a great record. And yeah, I don't know what to say about it that's not already said. It's The Wall. It's just perfect.
Yeah, I don't know if this is true, but I remember at one point reading that album coming out, The Wall, that it was the height of payola, where record labels would directly pay radio stations saying, you know, here's $100,000, play The Wall like crazy. Like, you know, that's illegal now.
Wow.
You can't do that. But
Yeah.
I hear that The Wall was the very height where that was at its worst, where they basically bought the radio play, which helped a weird album like The Wall become such a big hit. And it's because it was so obvious that that's what was happening, that because of the payola during the Pink Floyd Wall period, it became an illegal activity that you could no longer do. So I would have to check if that is actually true. But I remember over the years hearing that was actually a thing.
Interesting. I remember always hearing those payola days. Yeah, I didn't realize it went back that far back into the 70s, but yeah,
the record companies could buy their way into a hit single, which led to a hit album, which led them to more than recoup the initial payola. Like they were paying for success, which is pretty crazy. I was fortunate enough. Roger Waters, at the start of, say, 2010 to 2013, he went out and played The Wall in its entirety again. It became the highest grossing tour of all time by a solo artist. And I was able to catch it in Toronto. Were you able to ever catch Roger Waters live, or David Gilmour? And usually one's doing Dark Side of the Moon, and one, like they don't quite get along. So they're taking their own parts of the discography to play. Were you able to see them ever?
I do remember Sean, actually, from Finger 11, went to that show that you went and saw in Toronto. I think him and his wife went. So I remember him telling me about it and being very jealous. But no, I didn't get to see that. He's coming back here in Detroit, coming up here, playing in the Round. So I'm going to go see that. But, oh, no, you know what? Damn, I think I just missed that too. Damn it. You got these shows come and go. When you have kids these days, it's like, it's a hit and a miss when I can get out and see a show. But he definitely was just here. But yeah, I remember Sean saw him at the Sky Dome or Rogers Center, whatever.
I think we're at the same show.
Yeah. So I remember hearing about it. But
dude, so
you're sitting there. You're probably sitting right beside Sean Anderson at that show.
Maybe, yeah. I remember having the worst seats possible for Bruce Springsteen. So I was up in the 500. So if you've been to an arena and you've been in the nosebleeds, you know, there's 22,000 people, you're in the 300 sections, and sometimes that's bad. Now double the size of the arena and be in the worst, you know, twice as far back, being in the 500s. So I was that far up, and I was side stage. So speakers weren't even facing me. So you couldn't even, everything was muffled. Like you actually couldn't hear it at all. So that Bruce Springsteen concert taught me that if you're ever at the Rogers Center, you cannot be that far up, and you have to be more center stage. And learning that lesson, when Roger Waters came by with The Wall, I was center and on the floor. Like I knew what I had to do for that concert. So I took that in the perfect place possible. And it was an all-time great show. Yeah.
Not bad, yeah.
Unbelievable.
You know, as you're talking right now, I just got a text because I'm doing this on my cell phone. Human Kebab from USS just messaged me as you were chatting there. So he must have been listening in to us talking about Shipwreck.
He could feel his presence was called upon. Final thing about Pink Floyd The Wall. I heard that the original concept for this is Pink Floyd got so big that they were their shows were so big that at one point Roger Waters was on stage and the stage was so high and the crowd was so far away that he felt like there was an invisible wall between performer and artist. There was like an invisible barrier. And he felt like they were so big that they were no longer connected to the audience that they were playing for. And then, so that's the start of him thinking about this wall and then being able to put it in for, the human condition afterwards of a wall and
Right.
isolation and loneliness and mental health and all those things. So I've heard that that's the start of that concept, but I would have to.
I get that. When people ask me about playing, big festivals and stuff with 100,000 people or whatever it would be, when I was just out there in Europe with Chris Daughtry a few months ago, those festivals were like 90,000 people a show. And when I got back here, I hadn't played in quite a few years. So, people around here were asking me, and I was trying to like convey the idea that you can't, when you're on a big stage like that, especially as the drummer, the back of the stage, the size of that stage, the barricade, and then the crowd, they're so far away that there's nothing, you feel like there's a wall in front of you for sure. The more intimidated I ever have been in my life is playing at little clubs, when you can actually look into somebody's eyeballs staring at you. So yeah, I get that, man, that idea of a wall. It's, especially being the drummer, it's like, does anybody even know I'm up here? It's just like a minuscule line of people. And I get way more nervous playing at small clubs than I would any big stadium or anything like that.
Yeah, well, you picture, the singer that's right up front at the edge of the stage. And even for him, there's a massive gap sometimes between him and the audience. And then you're a few meters back from that. So it's there's an even bigger gap for you.
Yeah. I just want to throw that in just to pretend I had anything relative to say towards Roger Waters' feelings on it. Oh yeah, I totally relate.
I understand.
Oh yeah, I get it, bro.
Yeah, I hear you. So we have two more albums to dive into. So let's dive into Run DMC, Raising Hell. This is all the way back in 1986. This is such early hip hop that Dr. Dre's The Chronic doesn't come out for 6 more years. So this is a groundbreaking album. The first rap album to go platinum, the first rap album to go double platinum, the first rap album to go to #1 on the R&B charts. There was no rap charts before that. Because of this, They then create a rap/R&B chart. First rap song to go to the top 5 with Walk This Way, the crossover hit with rock and rap. This is like the birth of the rock rap genre that led to years later, 1992, one of my top 3 favorite albums of all time, Rage Against the Machine, self-titled debut. That would not exist without the precursor, this album laying the foundation. Talk to me about the Run DMC album. Why is this top 5? It's funny as a drummer, you have this in your top 5 where it's like, it's a drum machine, but give me the goods. Why is this in the top 5?
I'm glad. I love talking about this record because this is everything for me. Is certainly not what people would expect, coming from a rock guy. But when I was a kid learning to drum, I became a drummer on these early hip hop records. I had no idea what drum machines were. I didn't know anything except, what you hear on a song is what that is. So when I was 11 or 12 years old and I heard that first Walk This Way, Aerosmith, Run DMC thing, that was all I knew, man. I didn't know that was a electronic drum set or a real drum set. None of that made a difference to me. I just heard the beat, and I heard these people, the rapping to the beat, and it was my first sense of, I guess, really falling in love with rhythm and stuff. When I just had a snare drum at home. Before I could afford a drum set, or my parents bought me a drum set, I used to play my snare drum. I used to play the melodies of that Run DMC record. So it's like, so Peter Piper Pit Pepper, the one right rhyme, Humpty Dumpty fell down. This is our time. Checking it, what did it? He was quick. I would just drum what they were saying, the whole record. So it gave me a sense of I guess, timing and rhythm. And then after I would drum along to what those guys were rapping, I started listening to actual beats were always just 808 drum machines. And he just gave me this whole foundation for like falling in love with like heavy metal and stuff after that. It's just funny that people, know me as a rock guy or a metal guy, but it all derived from Raised in Hell, Run DMC. Everything from like listening to what the lyrics were. Before that, for me, there was Michael Jackson, there was Pink Floyd, there was the Beatles, there was Elvis in my house, but Run DMC was the first record of my own away from my family. That was my first thing I grasped on. And, and I sat in my bedroom and listened to every song. It was my first introduction to, guys making beats up with their mouth. That there's one song on there. It's called "Is It Live?" or there's one song where the whole song is just the beat bopping. Yeah. So it's just all on that album, everything rhythmically, lyrically, just, everything was done on a computer, but I didn't know that. All I had at that time was a pillow or a snare drum on my bed, playing along with that stuff. And that's really where I figured out, all the things that I came to love about, I guess, being a drummer, which is so funny that all came from nothing of a real drummer. Which is interesting. Is Grace, the Blue Skies, then later it was a V drum kit. So it's like it all kind of came full circle. But yeah, that album, man, it's like those other records we talked about. I can, put the first song on to the last song. It's still, it holds up, from start to finish. It sounds amazing. Rick Rubin did that record back in the day, when he was still kind of unknown.
We were talking Rick Rubin working with Metallica, and then Rick Rubin actually did this early hip hop album as well.
This was the sort of the birth of Rick Rubin back then with Run DMC might have been his first, and Russell Simmons. Yeah. Like those, that was, and it was also the first introduction to getting a rock band and I don't even know if it was as known as hip hop yet. It was just rap music back then, New York rap music, but getting Aerosmith to work with them. There were so many firsts on that record, but none of that really made a difference to me as a kid. It was just, I'd never heard anything like that. Yeah, it's just still, it's such a cool fucking sounding record still, man. If nobody's heard that, man, put Raising Hell on. The first song of the record is Peter Piper, and just goes, it's killer, man, from start to finish.
And they're going back between guys, right? Like during that intro rap, it's like you can hear it's two different guys rapping off of each other.
Yes, absolutely. Going left and right on the speakers, which a Rick Rubin thing. It's such an important record to me, man, that I'm glad when you originally called and asked me, I was like trying to think, which ones I would, because there's so many for all of us, how do you pick 5? But I'm so happy I got to at least put Run DMC where it needs to be. Because without Run DMC, for me, there would be no drumming, there'd be no songwriting, there'd be no, appreciation of any of this stuff. That album just is everything in my foundation as a musician.
So. I saw an interview with Rick Rubin where he talked about the early days of hip hop, and that he would see hip hop groups live. And then anytime he heard hip hop groups recorded, it was never the same. Like he'd see one hip hop group, and then when he heard that same hip hop group recorded, it was not even close to being the same. It's like there was like a different rule set for them live and then them recorded. And those early hip hop albums that he did with the Beastie Boys and LL Cool J and Run DMC, his goal was, how can I actually take what they do live and channel that and represent that on record? And that's kind of his claim to fame, is bringing more of the hard edge of the live stuff and bringing that to an album. And I think that's a part of what makes those early Rick Rubin albums so unique.
And they're heavy records. Like, when they became, because those are all New York records, the Beastie Boys, LL Cool J, Houdini, the Fat Boys, Grandmaster Flash. All that stuff. they're such heavy sounding records. Where you got into the 90s of more of, you know, the Dr. Dre stuff, it became more like low end, and it's a different kind of heavy. Those 80s records to me are, you know, you can put on South of Heaven, Slayer, and Beastie Boys, License to Ill, and you can hear the fucking heaviness in both. Or you can put on Raising Hell. I got to mention, honorable mention to the Fat Boys too. That's another record that I don't know what their first record's called, but it was all rhythmic to me, man. Like when those guys used to beatbox in their mouths, they were drumming with their mouths. And again, before I could afford, you know, before my parents bought me drums and stuff, that's all I had was trying to do stuff with my mouth, playing on pillows, playing with my hands on stuff. And it was like trying to create rhythms. And that's kind of where I learned it from, all those 80s rap records. So yeah, Run DMC still, like, it's probably my favorite album of all time. I'd say Raising Hell, number one.
Wow, dude, that's a big statement. I mean, the other four albums are so great as well. So for you to say
Just
that's
for me,
number one,
first,
yeah.
Yeah. As far as me in my path in life, Raising Hell is like, I think what got me here today for sure.
So I had already mentioned all the things in which this album became the first to do, like breaking new ground for all these things. Another thing, it's the first rap album to be nominated for a Grammy. So that had never happened before this album. And I have 3 quotes that I thought were cool about this album, and then we'll move on to your final album pick. So 3 quotes. So the album sold more than 3 million copies. And the quote says, Raising Hell, because of selling 3 million copies, is credited with heralding the golden age of hip hop, as well as hip hop's album era, helping the genre achieve an unprecedented level of recognition amongst critics. So that's one. The Toronto Star described the album as the record to move rap from the ghetto to the suburbs. Blame it or celebrate it. You cannot deny Raising Hell's impact. And the last one is from Time Magazine, who stated that the album was rap's first masterpiece. So a few quotes I thought you would enjoy there.
Absolutely. It's first man. Yeah, I mean, the records that came before that, Houdini, obviously, Grandmaster Flash, there were such important records that led up to Raising Hell, but yeah, that was the big breakout record. And then of course, I think right after Raising Hell, he did License to Ill. So super important records in hip hop history, man, for sure.
So we've made it to your final album. This is top 5 favorite albums of all time. Number 5. This is Queensryche, Operation Mindcrime. This comes out in 1988, same year as And Justice for All. That is a big year for you, my friend.
Yes.
Tell us about this album. So I'm going to be honest. This is the only album on the list that I had not listened to prior to this, preparing for this interview. It's the only band that I had never heard a single song from. So perhaps I'm a little embarrassed to say that. But I remember in a previous interview with someone, and I think it's Chad Saliga, Breaking Benjamin, Black Label Society. I believe he brought up the same band in his interview, saying they're one of his favorites and one of his influences. So 2 great drummers that love this album. So there must be some great drumming on here, which I know there is. Why does this stand out? And can you maybe paint a picture? I would say amongst the 5 albums you said, the other 4 are like globally well-known all-time great albums. And this one is more, you know, it went platinum, it was popular, it super critically acclaimed, but it didn't have that massive worldwide sales numbers where everyone knows this album. For our listeners that have never heard this album or never heard music from the band, how would you describe the band's music as well as this album for them to, once the interview's done, for them to go out and listen to it in its entirety?
Well, so Queensryche, I mean, started early 80s. I guess they were known then as being obviously the singer, he has got a really super high voice, kind of prog rock type of a band. They had a few records leading up to Operation Mindcrime. This was their first, their big concept record. So the album follows a storyline that they had made like a movie to as well. It was they're a band from Seattle, Washington. And you're right. When this came out, it was the same time And Justice came out. it didn't really do that well when this came out. It had its, it had a loyal following, but not like some of the other records. That it was a little, I think just because of the way Geoff Tate sings, it's not for everybody. But for me, this whole, when I mentioned this album on my list, this is all about being a drummer record. This album taught me everything, the foundation of everything that I, went on to be as a drummer in both Finger 11 and Saint Asonia. This kind of taught me everything. This made me the drummer that I am. And what I mean by that is the relationship between a drummer and the rhythm section, the bass player and the drummer. Scott Rockenfield, the drummer of Queensryche, and Eddie Jackson, the bass player of Queensryche, the way they play together always stood out to me. They were the first band that when Eddie Jackson hits a note on his guitar, Scott Rockenfield hits his bass drum. So it's always like do-do, do-do, do-do-do. They're always in sync together. And that was just, I was so drawn to rhythm from that kind of stuff as a kid. And, going on into my bands after that, Finger 11 is what I would always try to get Sean and me to try to lock into that kind of stuff. I don't know if I ever referenced to them or on. I'm kind of getting this from Scott Rockenfield and Eddie Jackson from Queensryche, but that was always where it came from. It just taught me everything about a rhythm section. And it's just such kind of like Pink Floyd The Wall is also a story. For me, it was like it was more mine, where, like you said, everyone knows Pink Floyd The Wall. When Operation Mindcrime came out, it was only a few select people knew it. Certainly most of my friends did not, and the people that didn't like it. So it just felt like it was my record. So I just learned everything, creatively as a drummer, musician. I really picked up from that album, every single song. I just can't. It's my favorite record of all time, and I still, when I put it on now and I show people, it's still an unknown enough of a record where I can show people and they haven't heard it. So it's fun to play for someone and go, hey, check this out. And there's a song "Sweet Sister Mary" on it, halfway through the record, where they have these audio parts of a woman's voice singing with their singer of the band, back forth dialogue, and just the musicianship on it. It's like every time Scott Rockenfield is playing, the bass player is playing the same thing with him, and it's just, I don't know, I always locked into that, and it just became the basis of everything for me as the drummer after that. So it's one of those records that's not for everybody, but man, for me, it's like it really shaped me as a drummer.
Yeah, so there's two hit singles. So there's Eyes of a Stranger and I Don't Believe in Love. These are like breakthrough hits on Billboard. And you mentioned the album didn't like explode out of the gate. It was like a slow burn, and over time it's eventually gold, eventually it's platinum. And it's funny, I listened to this. I remember, so this is a few days ago, I listened to this at the gym. So I'm like pumping weights and I'm listening to this album in its entirety. And I messaged you. I was like, dude, I'm so impressed with this album. It's hard enough to just put out an album with, say, 10 great songs. Just to do that is hard. And then here you have a whole story with characters and concepts, and not just, say 10 great songs, but you have 10, more than 10, I don't know, 14 great songs that all have to work in order to tell a specific story. So it's like somehow they have to flow into each other. So you can't have like 4 ballads in a row. So whatever you're writing, you have to be aware that this song would actually go here in the story. Like I give it so much credit for having such a grand vision and actually following through with it and delivering results that are a masterpiece like this. So I was super impressed. And I texted you, I'm like, dude, this is awesome. Like, how did I miss this all these years?
I know, you're like, man, this drum sounds killer. This snare drum's cracking or something like that, you said.
Yeah.
It is such a great sound.
Yeah, so I actually have a picture here that I want to bring up. So we dug up a picture here. Can you see this on the screen?
Yep.
Awesome. So for those watching, so people just listening are not going to see this, but those watching this on YouTube, who is this guy that you are hugging? What is going on here?
That's Jeff Tate, the singer of Queensryche. And this was the last tour I did with Disturbed when I was playing with Saint Asonia. This is one of the last days of the tour, and I think in Seattle, on the Disturbed Breaking Benjamin Alter Bridge Saint Asonia tour. So the backstory on this: John, the bass player of Disturbed, had done a side project with Geoff, and I don't even know if that's how I pronounce his name, right? Geoff Tate. I'm not sure. I'm just gonna say Geoff Tate. So leading up to that show, me and John, are buddies, and he was telling me different projects he'd been working on outside of Disturbed, and he's like, "Man, I'm doing this thing with Geoff Tate from Queensryche." I was like, "Oh my God, I love that band so much." I saw them front row on the Operation Mindcrime tour at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto, and saw them on the Empire tour. And he's like, "Yeah, I mean, he's coming to the show, tomorrow night or the next night. He's going to come out and do a song with us." So this was in the catering tent at the amphitheater. So I guess when he arrived, John texted me right away. He's like, "Dude, he's over here right now. Come over." So as much as I kind of look like I'm like feeling normal right there, I was in full on starstruck. I just finished telling him how I'd seen him front row, and your drummer gave me his drumstick from the front row, and I was singing all your songs, and he was just kind of like, "Oh, okay, man, cool, dude, nice to meet you." But yeah, I went on full fanboy mode with him, and that was seconds after that picture, or before that picture was taken.
That's awesome. That's good that they say don't meet your idols, and in that case, it seemed like it was a good dude. It was a good day for you.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. What's funny is there's actually a Canadian story behind this album, and it's actually kind of dark. So I'm just going to read this real quick, which is cool. So you're talking about it being a concept album. So the story follows Nicky, a drug addict who becomes disillusioned with the corrupt society of his time and reluctantly becomes involved with a revolutionary group as an assassin of political leaders. So that's the concept of the album. And check this. The idea for the album came from Jeff Tate, so the guy we just saw in the picture, after moving to Canada and listening to the talk of members of the militant Quebec separatist movement who had grown friendly with him, some of whom were in organizations which engaged in bombing and terrorism. So there's a Quebec Canada history behind this album, which is pretty cool with us Canadians here. So
wow. Well, I can certainly relate to the drug addicted dude as well. I know one of those guys.
Yeah. And the singer, Jeff, actually, there was a bunch of resistance. So he came up with this concept and none of the other band members were on board. And apparently he had to one by one, like isolate each member and just with one member convince them and get their approval. And then over time, other people were outnumbered and eventually they all came on board. But I guess it wasn't easy to explain or have other people buy into that vision. And it's a good thing that he stuck with it because of the album that we got.
Classic album. I love Queensryche. And Empire, the record that came after that, and the album before that, Rage for Order, are two of my favorites too. And they did one more, I think, an album called Promised Land after Empire. All those records are super important to me. But they're just one of those bands that with his style of singing, it became kind of, it wasn't everyone's cup of tea. Which I understand, but I mean, Metallica brought them out. That whole And Justice for All cycle, Metallica had Queensryche opening for them on that tour throughout America. So they were respected. It kind of took, that album didn't do as well as they hoped. And then when Empire came out, when they were able to headline arenas on their own, they went back and did that whole record in its entirety, but it was like an album too late. So they would come out and play all the hits from Empire, Empire, Jet City Woman, all their old songs. And then halfway through the show, they'd go backstage, change the whole stage and they do the whole Operation Mindcrime record in its entirety, but they kind of had to do it a record after, so, but it was cool, man. I saw it front row and it's awesome.
So you were too young in 1988, but you were mentioning that Metallica brought them out on tour. You could have heard two of your 5 favorite albums played in their entirety at the same time if you were old enough in 1988.
Well, no, I tried. They played at Cops Coliseum in Hamilton, the Injustice for All tour with Queensryche opening up. I tried. My parents wouldn't let me go, but I was very well aware that the show was going on. I don't think I could go without my big brother at the time, and we didn't get tickets. So
you were already a fan at that point. Okay. I didn't know if it was like in retrospect that you got into those albums or it was.
I was into it then. Yeah.
Okay. And there's actually a sequel to Operation Mindcrime. There's the second one. Is that true?
There is. Yeah. I don't know.
The same?
I'll leave it at that. I love the first one. I'm going to leave it at that.
All good. So a few points about that album, then we'll wrap up. So again, I love seeing the retrospective reviews. I love seeing what critics thought of the albums at the time, especially if they say something clever. So Rock Hard reviewer remarked that the music featured clever breaks, unusual song structures, and ingenious arrangements, which was an unmistakable sign that the band did not aim to the taste of the masses, but primarily wanted to publish intelligent, artistically demanding albums. So that's a good synopsis. Kerrang! Magazine had it at number 34 on the 100 greatest heavy metal albums of all time. So that's awesome. And last thing, the song I Don't Believe in Love was actually nominated for a Grammy Award for Best Metal Performance. So Grammy nominated band right there because of the album. And last but not least, Avenged Sevenfold, who went on to sell millions, as well as Dillinger Escape Plan, have both cited Operation Mindcrime as being big influences on their career and their music.
Oh, cool. Neat.
So that is pretty cool. So we did a 1 hour deep dive on the stuff we missed on the first interview. We went, I don't know, an hour and a half into your top 5 albums. And just as we wrap up, a couple more questions. Do you have any honorable mention albums? So we did the top 5 of all time. Maybe you have 10 or 15 favorite albums and you have to narrow it down. Any honorable mention albums that on the right day you would fit in there with the top 5? Any that you just want to mention that our listeners should go check out?
Okay, well, I'm going to mention just one because there's so many, but when I was talking to you about this leading up, I was like, man, I got to mention this band. There's a new band from England called Sleep Token. And their album, oh my gosh, you probably have it written down, the name of the record that I told you about.
I'll find it for you while you talk right now.
Yeah. So this band Sleep Token are a new band out of, I think, Birmingham. They're, for some reason, man, it's very prog rock type stuff. I cannot stop listening to it. It's all I listen to right now. And probably because of the musicality. The drummer is from another planet, but the vocalist is, but they all wear masks. So it's like kind of like Slipknot when they came out. They're one of those hidden identity bands that are very artistic. And they just had a song, I think, released yesterday as well. But did you find the name of the record? Something about my tomb?
Yeah, this place will become your tomb.
Yes, yeah. This place will become your tomb. The band Sleep Token. If nobody's hearing this has not checked that out yet, that's my new thing. And then of any Peter Gabriel record, I think would be on the list as well. Peter Gabriel, singer, songwriter, and his musicians are, I wanted to include some of his stuff in that list too. But yeah, as far as new bands, that's Sleep Token's the band I'm trying to get everyone to check out. And Chris Daughtry is the guy that had me check them out. Mark Tremonti from Alter Bridge got him onto it. And then Chris texted me and was like, dude, Mark showed me this band. You got to check out Sleep Token. So hopefully now on this podcast, I can pass that along.
That's enough credit between the three of you guys gushing about this album. That should be enough for us to go check it out.
Yeah.
You're talking about Peter Gabriel. So generally, if someone's starting with just one Peter Gabriel album, it's normally the album So that has like Sledgehammer and those songs. That's usually where somebody starts. Final question. What is the album that you love most that our listeners would not think that you would be into? So is there like, Justin Bieber, Purpose is a great album that sometimes we're too cool to admit. Do you have any albums in your favorite of all time that's like ABBA or like something kind of random versus your image? Anything stand out right now?
Oh my gosh. It's funny because my wife loves Justin Bieber. So she plays his records all the time. I love everything. So I'll just name some bands instead of records. Like Justin Bieber for One Direction. Have great songs. Oh gosh.
You know what's funny is even though we just did like 2.5 hours of great stuff, the clip that's going to go viral is you saying you like Justin Bieber and One Direction, probably just the way the world works,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Justin Bieber, One Direction. Man, I'm always discovering what interests young kids these days. I realize how much older I'm getting where I feel sometimes so far from it. So I just try to make a point of like asking my nieces and stuff what they're listening to, because it's easy to get away from stuff in your age and in your tastes and stuff. And so I try my best to like stay open to check out new stuff. But my wife is, younger enough for me that I still kind of get that from her, where she still likes, current pop music. So it's either asking her or then going to my nieces and asking what they like. So yeah, man, at the end of the day, a good song, a well-written song is a well-written song. So, I mean, I grew up on back in the 80s, like Michael Jackson, Thriller, and Billy Idol, and Cyndi Lauper, and Culture Club, and Wham. Those were all pop bands, but it was just, it was all just popular music back then. Back then, it wasn't so much split into genres. So, I mean, I grew up on popular music. So, a well-written song is a well-written song, whether it's like 5 young, cute young dudes in some new boy band or some, whatever it is, whoever's writing those songs, it's going to stand the test of time. So that's what I think.
So we do something with each podcast episode. We have this chain of questions that runs through every single episode. So what we do is we have a current guest provide a question that I'm going to ask the next guest. They don't know who it is, male or female, what the age, what they do for a living. They know nothing, and they just provide a question. And then we ask the next guest, and it's just a chain that runs through it. So I have a question for you from the last guest. So one of Canada's best photographers, Darius Bashar, he's got a great question. He asks, what is your gift? And what is the hardest part of having that gift?
Ooh, well, thank you, Darius. I don't believe we've met, but I know lots about you and very talented. What is my gift, and what was the second part of the question?
The hardest part of having that gift. Sometimes the gift, there's the gift and the curse of it, Your gift has to be your drumming,
It's one of those things. I mean, I struggle to say it's a gift, because it's one of those things you got to do and work at, and it's not I don't think I was born with it. Where I think as a gift is something you're born with. So, but I mean, for the sake of this podcast, we'll go with drumming. I suppose.
What is the hardest part of being a drummer? There's the highs and the lows that are tough. What is the hardest part?
I think I can only put myself now, today, presently in my shoes. I think the hardest part of that would be trying to, when you're young, doing it because you love doing it, and it doesn't matter, getting in a van and, having $20 in your pocket is okay. I think the hardest part about doing what I love now is trying to justify how it makes sense in the real world, where, going out and drumming, playing with somebody now, or flying out to do something, it has to, at my age, at 46 years old, it has to involve my family and paying bills and stuff. It can't just be like a childhood dream anymore, which is, I still have that part of me that's like,
You
So
have
it's
responsibilities now, right?
it's
So it's
balancing,
different.
yeah, it's balancing the gift has now become a job, and how to, treat that job responsibly. And you can't take offers that aren't gonna, you know, if I can't afford to do something, I have to say no to it. And there's the other side, and it's like, oh man, but I love doing this. So it's that balancing of the passion versus the real world, and where it has to sort of make sense. I still struggle with that every day. I mean, just recently, somebody asked me to do something with them musically, and the conversation is awesome. But then there's like that end part of the conversation where it's like, so, and I hate that, but that so part is the real world. And if it doesn't work out that way, then if I'm not able to do it, I just still really struggle to say I can't, man. So there's that part of me that always will just want to say yes to everything and do everything. And that other part of me that's like, this is the real world now. And I have bills to pay, and this all has to make sense in my life. But, so yeah, that will always be a struggle with me. Long answer to that, but I don't know if drumming's my gift, but, thank you for asking me. I don't know if that worked, but there it is.
That was a great answer. And do you have a question now that you can pass this forward? Can you provide a question that I will ask the next guest? I don't know who that guest is yet. I'm going to schedule that in the next few days. Who knows who it is or what they do? It could be just something goofy to ask, something funny. It could be deep. It could be memorable, inspiring. What comes to you right now?
All right. How about just something silly?
You silly goose, you.
If you could go back in time and you had to pick one person you could kill and one person you could kiss, who would those two people be?
I didn't know how far you're going to go with that. So that's good. PG-13 did a bit. So one person to kill or kiss.
Or just whatever, or I won't get nasty, but yeah.
Yeah, cool. That's a good one. All right, so bad. We another deep dive here. What do we do? 2 hours and 45 minutes, something like that. We gave the people the goods, what they wanted. Man, I appreciate sitting down with you. I always learn so much. I get to see the behind the scenes of your drumming and your discography, and ask you all the questions that I wanted to know about the bands that you've been in. You're one of my favorite people to talk to on the podcast. You're one of the most popular guests for the fan base, for the listeners. They love when you come on, and it shows. I see it in the numbers of the metrics and the downloads and the listens. So I really appreciate it. I've been a lifelong fan, so it means a lot. Just like you with Jeff Tate in that picture. That's you and me here, and I really appreciate it. Thank you. Despite looking after the two kids on your own, two or more kids, you did your best. You made it happen, and we're here. So I really thank you, Rich.
Thank you, man. I end up in my bedroom. You've seen me walk with my phone throughout the house, go back to some places, move around. So I ended up here, and it's quiet behind me. So I don't know what that means.
We got the MTV Cribs tour. Just
yeah. So I appreciate you and your listeners, letting me do that. I apologize. I had to move around a few times, but thank you so much, man. I love talking to you. I love being on here with you, and yeah, what a treat, dude. Thank you so much.
Amazing. You're very welcome. So to the podcast listeners, to the Rich fans, to the Finger 11 fans, to the Saint Asonia fans, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate it. And we'll see you on the next episode. If you've enjoyed today's episode of the podcast, please take a moment to subscribe, like, comment, and share. What I want to know is, who would you like me to sit down with next for a 2-hour deep dive interview? You can let me know by reaching out to me on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Joel Martin Mastery. Joel is Joel. And you can find me on Twitter and Snapchat at Joel Mastery. So I am done. I am complete. I approve this message, and I'll see you on the next episode.